Welcome back, Nerglings. It's been a while since I've done one of these, so let's see if I can remember what to do. As you can see, today we are taking a look at the Beastmen. But before we start, be sure to comment, like and subscribe so you don't miss an update. The Beastmen, the dark children of chaos, mutated beyond belief due to the corrupting influence of the dark gods. They are a beautifully sadistic blend of man and beast, and are certainly the most numerous of the worshippers of chaos. This series, like most, will concentrate on my thoughts about collecting this plethora of models, how they thematically fit together, and how different styles can complement each other when given strong common elements. With that in mind, let's have a look at the miniatures. Throughout the army, I have tried to double down on the chaotic nature of the Beastmen. Every unit is populated by a mad mix of different models, as always, from different manufacturers. To give you an idea of the breadth of the collection, there are models from Alternative Armies, Essex Miniatures, Eureka Miniatures, Foundry, Grenadier, Midland Miniatures, Merton, Nightmare Miniatures, Old School Miniatures, Ralpatha, Reaper, and of course classic 90s and 2000s Citadel. You may be interested to hear how I go about organising models into cohesive units from such diverse backgrounds. Loosely, the trick here is that I try as best as possible to have models equipped and armed in similar ways in the same unit. Whilst this isn't that relevant in Beastmen armies, as they would just band together in loose groups with whatever weapons they had to hand, it does look better on the tabletop. Also, sizes aren't too much of an issue, as again Beastmen fight in a flurry of bodies and blades, more than happy to fight between Ungor and Minotaurs, such is their bloodlust. Now you may see some familiar models in this army, as Games Workshop generously decided to re-release Gorthor's Army Box once again in a made-to-order set a couple of years ago. Fortunately, they cast them all in metal and not plastic or resin, so these fab models are how they were intended to be, heavy and indestructible. I will be using models from several armies that are already somewhat complete in this collection. For instance, the Bestigor and Plague Monks with associated characters from my Nergal army, the Khorngor from my Khorne army, and the Mutant Slaves from my Chaos Dwarf army will all feature in this mighty horde. In the case of the Bestigor, Plague Monks and Khorngor, they will be lifted as is. However, the two Mutant Slave units will have a leadership change, swapping the Chaos Dwarf leader for a Beastman Shaman in each. Finally, a unit I have yet to finish off, but will be on loan from my Tzeentch army, will be a small unit of Tzaangors. So what is the army made up of? The bulk of the troops are a mix of Beastmen, Lizardmen and Skaven. I figured if I was going to make a Beastmen army, I should include all the iterations of man and beast that are available. In addition, bearing in mind we are talking about chaos, there are a smattering of demons in the mix too, to make the units pop a little more. After all, what is a chaos army without some demons? As a supporting unit, I have 20 odd little chaps, which are a mixture of mutated children, small demons and familiars led by a witch, and supported by a strange Skeksis matron creature. With the main body of troops covered off, I'll be using a unit of 10 centaurs to maraud around the battlefield at speed, several units of minotaurs to provide some serious muscle, some trolls to slow things down if necessary with some stupidity, skirmishing Ungor to spring traps, chaos hounds to chase down fleeing foes, and a Jabberwocky to really cause some commotion. I will also have a war shrine carried by 2 able-bodied beastmen and a flock of harpies to harass the enemy's flanks, and war machines. So, quite a versatile bunch indeed. The army will be led by Gorthor on his chariot, ably supported in his efforts to conquer the old world by a Vermin Lord as a greater demon of beasts, something of my own design. Karak Clovenhoof, a powerful Centaur Lord, a hulking Minotaur Lord battle standard, the classic Zygor, and 3 Skaven characters in the form of Lord Skrulk, some chap with a flail, and a fella riding a giant rat. In addition, I'll be making great use of the Pantheon of Chaos range, which has a bewildering array of Beastmen models from numerous releases throughout the years, as they are certainly a more heroic scale than most of the models in the army. They will fill positions of particular relevance and stature, such as heroes and shaman. Of note, every miniature in this army is metal, save for the Jabberwocky, which is a filthy piece of fine cast junk. The model itself is, however, pretty darn nice, and he fits in with the aesthetic of the army very well. As usual, due to many of my old style miniatures residing on pre-slaughter integral bases, I'm using my favourite 25mm hollow lipped squares from EM4 miniatures, which can house the ugly lumps that these models stand on. Also, I'll be using laser cut MDF for many of the large creature bases. At 3mm thick, and whatever size you wish them to be cut to, they're incredibly versatile, not to mention far cheaper than appropriately sized plastic alternatives. Naturally, I'll make great use of Milliput, my sculpting material of choice. I use it for everything from filling the slots on bases to sculpting new pieces of armour, bags, repairing the dreaded lead rot if I deem it necessary, and even reinforcing weapons if required. Finally, I'll be using Army Painter paints, cheap acrylics from my local art store, quick shade varnish, and homemade basing material, with green flock and chunks of cork purchased from eBay on the cheap. Of course, I will expand on the use of all of the above and more in the following series. So, stay tuned to see what I can achieve with this great army. That's just about all I have for you this time. Be sure to like, share and subscribe, and thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we're taking a look at the origins of the foul Beastmen. But before we start, be sure to comment, like and subscribe so you don't miss an update. I looked up into the sky, and there I saw my doom, lithesome yet dread. What creatures were these? How many tortures would I endure before peace was mine? 1,000 wretched forms, united only by a hatred that never ends. Malign and savage to the last, they brim with bitterness for the works of man. The Beastmen, sometimes known as the Beastkin, the Cloven Ones, the Horned Ones, the Beasts of Chaos, or even the Children of Chaos, are a race of savage, mutant humanoids. They bear various traits of bestial appearance, such as cloven hooves, muscular human bodies, horned bestial heads, and a malign, primitive intelligence. Proud of their origins, it is said they are the descendants of ancient humans, corrupted and twisted by the influence of chaos at the dawn of the coming of chaos into the world. The horned head of a Gore is often used as a symbol to represent all Beastmen. From deep within the twisted forested woodlands of the old world and beyond, the Beastmen are a violent, war-driven race that seek only to plague and destroy the civilizations of mankind. They prey on the weak and defenseless, striking at lonely settlements without warning in a rampage of destruction before disappearing into the protective darkness of their dark wilderness, running away from the dire retribution that fails to follow. To the citizens of the Empire, Bretonia, and the other nations of the old world, the Beastmen have come to represent creatures from a half-remembered age of nightmare. Men deceive themselves that the danger has passed, that they are safe in their walled towns, that their steel and gunpowder, wizards' arts and engineers' creations will hold at bay the lowly beast things that haunt the woodlands. men tell themselves that the creatures of the forest are disorganised and incapable of fielding armies that can threaten their high-walled cities. They are quite wrong, for to underestimate the Beastmen is a fatal mistake. The Cloven Ones are creatures of violence and conflict, and they are far more cunning than the Empire believes. Worse still, the more noble and haughty the foe, the more the Beastmen are driven to prove their own supremacy by casting him down from his lofty pedestal and trampling his body beneath blood-encrusted, filthy hooves. As such, these unruly, coarse and foul creatures would go to war with savage intent, slaughtering the civilized races like cattle, burning down and shattering their homes, and stomping on the remains with their cloven hooves until there is nothing left but devastation and ruin. It is said that so long as chaos reigns over this world, the Beastmen shall plague the lands of mankind for all eternity. The origins of the Beastmen are tied closely with the origins of mankind itself. Indeed, long before the collapse of the northern and southern poles, there was no such thing as Beastmen living within the world of that ancient age. By this time, mankind was still a fledgling and unknown race, still confined to lands far from the reaches of the ancient civilizations of the dwarves and elves. The Old Ones, ancient beings of incredible power, had stood guard upon this fledgling world, staving off the undesirable races and seeding the world with the first true forms of life. However, a catastrophic event had occurred in an unknown point in time that has since cursed the world to its inevitable damnation. A great calamity befell the world. The great polar warp gates, once a marvel of technology, had collapsed, and with them the raw stuff of chaos flowed like a river upon the harsh, lifeless lands of the northern and southern wastes. Boiling out from the wound within reality itself were the demons and their warping powers of magic. The effects of the gate's destruction created all manner of abominations, and from these abominations came the first incursion of chaos, and the first of the Beastmen. As the fabric of reality was torn asunder, from the skies came pulsing comets of mysterious rock, contrails of unlight flaring in their wake as they plummeted towards the untamed forests. The lands were pounded and punished as if by the fists of the gods themselves. Huge chunks of solidified chaos energy thrown from the collapsing dimensional gates set aflame the skies. They crashed into the world like meteors, felling endless tracts of forest and burying themselves inside massive craters of scorched earth. With each impact, the land was infected further by the raw stuff of chaos. Its insidious taint worked outward into the fertile soil, suckled upon by the roots of ancient trees and seeping into the air breathed by the nomads and the beasts that populated the lands. As chaos infected the lands like a malign cancer, the ancient forests of the world began to stir, writhing with corrupted energies. The primitives of the land and the beast of the forest have merged into beings of both man and beast. In time, the offspring of these creatures spread throughout the wilderness of the world, gathering in the dark places before unleashing their wars upon humanity. For thousands of years, the Beastmen and their night-bred kin ruled the forests, preying upon the scattered bands of men as wolves upon sheep. Then a man came, bearing a golden hammer that was the bane of all enemies, and united the human tribes, challenging the Beastmen for dominance of the lands. This warrior elevated mankind from a collection of loosely organised tribesmen into the massive empire it is today. The time before the rise of mankind is regarded by the Beastmen both as part remembered dream and legend. The Beastmen's rituals are full of references to a time when they ruled the lands unchallenged, and a time when they shall rule again. To the Cloven Ones, the War of the Hammer heralded an age of bitterness and strife in which mankind rose to undeserved and stolen power, with the God King Sigmar unifying the human tribes into what would soon become the Empire. With their power forever broken, the Beastmen of today hate mankind with a deep loathing born of uncounted centuries of battle and righteous persecution. They seek a return to that primeval age when man was little more than prey to be hunted and devoured, where the Beastmen were considered the true masters of the world. For mankind's part, the Beastmen soon became creatures of horror and superstition, embodying and confirming their deepest fears of what might lurk in the forests of the old world. It is said in the legends of Bretonnia that the Beastmen looked out from under their forest eaves, spying upon man, and in doing so knew their impurity. While some scholars of the Empire hold that the beasts are jealous and resentful of man's ingenuity and cleanness of limb. Whatever the case, all men know that the Beastmen harbour a bitter hatred for humanity. This enmity goes far beyond jealousy or spite. It is not just man that the Beastmen despise so, but his civilization, his works, and his gods. They are a bitter, savage race that have become so blinded by their bloodlust that they are disillusioned by the hardship and suffering of their very own existence. They are so filled with justified hatred that they see humanity as the cause for their suffering. For mankind to the Beastmen is simply a reminder of a life that these creatures would never have a chance of living. That's just about all I have for you today. Be sure to tune in next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at the physiology of the Beastmen. But before we start, be sure to comment, like and subscribe so you don't miss an update. When the world was very young, a group of nomads drifted north into the icy steppes, where they tamed wild dogs to help herd wild boar, long-horned cattle and goats, which they raised for food and clothing. When the gate of heaven collapsed, chaos was released into our world, saturating the people of the north. The loosed energy of chaos melded these poor, simple folk with their herds and other animals, warping them into the Beastmen we recognise today. At their primal core, the Beastmen are indeed a fusion of man and beast, a transformation that came about when the gates of heaven collapsed and the influence of chaos smothered the world in its grip. The term Beastmen, then, is often used to describe a whole spectrum of different animal-like beings of varying appearance and distinction. To an extent, a Beastman is also classified as a mutant. Unfortunately, no scholar can truly say with certainty where a mutant ends and a Beastman begins. There is no absolute dividing line between human and mutant, or between mutant and Beastman, or between Beastman and demon. Rather, there is simply a spectrum of taint. Of note, lizardmen, naga, blemmies, centaurs and even orcs and goblins are all classed as beastmen by some, whose natural inclination is to denigrate anything other than a pure-blooded man, as touched by chaos. Nevertheless, all beastmen are seen to be spiteful and mean-spirited creatures that revel in bloodshed and chaos. They loathe order and the very concept of civilization in all its forms. Beastmen are not believed to be creatures of nature, for there is nothing natural about their existence. The herdstones and rituals of the beastmen corrupt the very essence of nature itself. It is for this reason beastmen are especially loathed by the wood elves of Athel Loren, with whom the beastmen have been fighting a grueling secret war for centuries. A typical beastman generally has a certain appearance that is consistent with most other beastmen breeds. They are known for having the head and legs of various animals. The most common are usually the heads of cattle or goats, though some have been seen with traits of other animals as well. Their overall body, however, is noticeably humanoid, with the chest and arms resembling that of a man. They are capable of walking in an upright posture, but some have been known to walk on all fours. Their matted hair is encrusted with blood and dung, a haven for fat ticks and colonies of fleas that keep the beastmen in a constant state of agitation. Due to their harsh living, a beastman is also naturally strong and well muscled. The robust constitution of the cloven ones allows them to live upon the most meagre or unpleasant of diets. They prefer great chunks of meat above all, but, unlike their larger minotaur brethren, they do not care if it is infested and maggot-ridden. Beastmen are also well-known cannibals who gorge themselves upon the corpses of their own kind without hesitation. Entrails, hair, horns, hooves and all, and believe that to do so is to inherit the strength of the victim. This diet of dead meat is supplemented with grubs, hairy-legged spiders, poisonous centipedes, plump blowflies and other unsavoury foodstuffs, as well as the occasional lost child or lone woodsman. Human is a highly sought-after delicacy to the beastmen, and rivals have been known to fight to the death over a single piece of flesh. As a product of chaos mutation, beastmen are typically born in one of three ways. The first way is generally by simple reproduction between a male beastman and the more docile and less numerous female variants. The beastwomen are almost shy and gentle in comparison to their brutish brothers in hoof, however, are still noticeably bestial in their appearance. The second way is generally the most well known. In this case, a child of two human parents might be born with obvious signs of mutation. Unable to cure their child, the parents are forced by law to give them up to a local priest or witch hunter to be properly extinguished before the child grows to become a beastman proper. However, most parents are incapable of doing such a thing, and so, to both expunge the child from their lives as well as the parent's sin, they would leave the child alone in the forest to die by the elements. By doing so, the parents consider themselves cleaned from their actions and allow the gods to do what they wish with the child. However, such events almost never kill the child, for within hours of being left in this lonely state, the crying will signal other beastmen to its location. By then, the beastmen would take the child as their own, and in doing so, swell the numbers of the tribes ever further. These gaves are considered a gift of the gods. Whether the child becomes a Gore, Ungor or Bray, they are held in high esteem due to the purity of their birth. The third way is when a human is transformed into a beastman at some point later in their life. Such a situation is a painful process which results in the human gaining many bestial traits. Neither fully human or fully beastman, these creatures known as turn skins are never truly accepted by either human or beastman societies. Ostracised and despised by their former peers, they have no escape other than to flee human society. Many of them become renegades, and some manage to join a beastman tribe who may accept them as slaves. All beastmen are surly and mean-spirited, for they know they are destined to live a short, brutal life of squalor, suffering and pain. When their blood is up, and foul-smelling breath snorts from their gore-stained snouts, the beastmen become belligerent and bellicose in the extreme, every gesture or glance brimming with hostility. The atavistic fury that each beastman harbours within his soul is always but a moment away from the surface, and it is this rage that gives the beastmen much of their unholy strength on the field of battle. Bitterness and spite simmers in the heart of every beastman. It takes little more than a few well-chosen words to spur a Gore into a frenzy of unrestrained rage. The Gore are the most common type, distinguished by the fact they possess large horns. They are a broad class comprising more specific types. Below the Gores are the lowly breeds which look to them for leadership. Caprigores are the most common breed of Gore, recognisable by their goat or sheep-like heads and legs, along with, more importantly, their curling or straight goat horns. Bovigores are bull or ox-headed beasts with cattle horns. However, they are not Minosaurs, who are much larger, more powerful creatures. Ungor are much more variable in appearance. They possess some form of horns, but the Ungor themselves are not recognisable as either Caprigores or Bovigores. The most favoured Ungor might possess a spectacular array of horns, or a single fine horn, but most have only small or misshapen versions which other beastmen find contemptible. They also bear the most humanoid appearance, much like Pan. Finally, the Brays are a lowly breed of beastmen. Their name refers to the braying cacophony they make when they feast or fight together. Brays can appear in any form and are mainly distinguished by the fact they lack any kind of horns. Bray shamans are the intermediaries between the tribe and the gods. The majority are not powerful enough to challenge the tribal leader, but some ambitious ones are more than willing and able to fulfill both positions. Shamans are marked apart from other beastmen by their heterochromatic eyes, with one eye typically being a different colour than the other. The specific colours are believed to signify the favour in which the shaman is held by a particular power. A shaman might repeat the colours of his eyes in his robes so that he might display the favoured colours of the Chaos Gods. Minotaurs are massive beastmen with the head and hind quarters of a bull. Standing nearly 10 feet tall, Minotaurs are a class of beastmen unto themselves. They are notable in their smaller numbers, which they more than make up for in their sheer strength and size. Notable mutations and variants of the beastmen exist. We have already noted that scholars across the old world disagree about the true definition, but most can agree that the following are indeed beastmen worth mention. Eastern beastmen are tiger-headed and said to dwell in the kingdoms of Ind, noble but fickle beings, as likely to burn villages as they are to protect them, whilst monkey warriors are said to live in the mountains of Heaven and Cathay. Ape men live in the Southlands, tribes of primitive, human-like primates who make use of tools, weapons, and cunning in attacks on the other inhabitants of the jungles. Where ape ends and beastmen begin is unclear to many. Lake men are amphibian-like beastmen found primarily in the Leonian region of the Forest of Ardennes, staging attacks from the waters that seem to hold little regard for the other beastmen breeds as they attack each other on sight. Beast fiends Unlike those children of chaos found elsewhere in the world, beast fiends, variants of beastmen, have little resemblance to mankind. Instead, these creatures of the southern wastes are fusions of beasts and demon. The sounds of distant battle will cause a beastman to prick up his tufted ears. In an instant, a fight or duel upon a woodland path will invariably bring dozens of beastmen from all about in a very short space of time. Above all, though, it is the trappings of progress and civilization that fan the embers of hatred burning within each beastman's breast. A mere glimpse of bright colours, especially the colour red, will often be enough to get a beastman's pulse racing with bloodlust. The sight of a proud flag or coat of arms, a pristine uniform or a magnificent statue elicits a powerful reaction in the beastman, for the things of order are anathema to the children of chaos. All caution is put aside in a desperate attempt to tear down and befoul the offending article, to stomp it into the mud, smear it with dung, or rip it to pieces and chew on the remains. And that's just about all I have for you today. Be sure to tune in next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we're taking a look at the ways of the Beastmen. But before we start, be sure to comment, like and subscribe so you don't miss an update. In many respects, the society and hierarchy of the Beastmen is almost as sophisticated as those of humans. Its structure is rigid, so that every member of a tribe knows his or her place, is completely aware of which other beastfolk are higher and which are lower in the hierarchy. Very unchaotic, you may think. Yet movement within this hierarchy is always possible. Any member can challenge the leader or any other member at almost any time, whether formally or informally. The Beastmen live by the base laws of nature, twisted beyond recognition by the corrupting influence that is chaos. Though they may walk upright and speak, albeit in guttural tones, the Beastmen are as close to animals as they are to men. Violence simmers beneath the surface of every exchange, each Beastman seeking every opportunity to enforce his superiority over all others. Domination is enforced with bloody violence, and every Beastman quickly learns his place under the heel of the war herd's chieftain. Should any one of their numbers show weakness, the victim will suffer for it, and his position within the war herd will be diminished. In more understandable terms, the Beastmen follow a violent hierarchy based upon the overall prowess of a Beastman, as well as what kind of breed the particular Beastman is. Those that possess exceptional strength and bear the greatest blessings of the dark gods, such as magnificent curling horns, occupy the higher tiers of their tribes. Those Beastmen that possess small horns or none at all, such as the lowly breeds of Ungor and Bray, are always below those who do, such as the Gore and Minotaurs. Hence, each war herd is led by the strongest and most bestial amongst their numbers, who are collectively known as Beast Lords. These primitive chieftains occupy the apex of tribal authority. It is his absolute right to rule as he pleases, provided that he has the strength to back it up. To maintain his position, he has to continually fight off challenges from his many jealous and power-hungry subordinates. He makes a totem from the pelts of those he has defeated to prove his right to rule, making his personal banner a gory record of his deeds and conquests. One day, though, a challenger will come who is stronger, younger, and far more vigorous than the current incumbent. And then the chieftain's own hide will hang bleeding in the wind from the challenger's totem. From here, this vicious cycle is repeated again and again without end. Status within a beast tribe is typically regulated by the strongest individuals within the group. Those wishing to obtain a higher position simply have to challenge an opponent of higher status in a brutal and often fatal duel. The only exception is the Ungor and Bray, those beastmen or other mutants who are not graced with the horns that are the most distinctive feature of this race. No Gore or horned beastman would consent to being ruled by an Ungor or Bray, no matter how skilled or powerful the lesser beastman might be. In any case, such a situation never occurs in practice. Ungor and Bray are simply weaker and less physically imposing than Gores. The occasional spirited Ungor who might step out of line is quickly torn to shreds by the Gore of the tribe. Mutants who do not have at least one animalistic feature, even if it is so minor as enlarged fang-like teeth, are rarely accepted into beastmen bands, even as Ungor, but sometimes form their own tribes, sometimes led by outcast Gore or other powerful chaos creatures. Above the ordinary Gore are the Bestigor, large and powerful beastmen that occupy the highest position within their tribe, just below the Beast Lord himself. Some powerful Gores have too much ambition to be willing to serve as a Bestigor and force their way up the hierarchy still further. At this point, these Gore leaders are known by many names, such as Beast Lords, Foe Renders, Gouge Horns, War Gores, Bane Beasts and Bane Gore. From here, the hierarchy becomes more complex. These different names are not merely local affectations, but precise statements of rank. These various Gore leaders will work together, each with their own smaller warband, banding together under one supreme leader of each horde. Fortunately, such cooperation is relatively rare, and the typical traveller will be most unlucky to be attacked by a beastman herd that is led not by one, but multiple leaders. The beastmen all worship the gods of chaos as the one true divine power of the old world. They are the product of their corruption and, as such, are wholly dedicated to the spreading of their will across all lands and beyond. As these beastmen pursue their endless hunt against all civilization, some beastmen commit such acts of savagery and bloodshed that the attentions of the dark gods themselves are turned their way. Ordinarily, the ruinous powers pay little heed to the deeds of the beastmen, knowing that the children of chaos will enact their will regardless of any gifts or rewards offered. The beastmen are utterly enthralled to the magnificence of chaos, and are thus totally free of any constraints imposed by these malign gods upon their thoughts and actions. They do as they please, and, in doing so, serve chaos with every shred of their being. Though they do not truly comprehend it, the beastmen are a vital part of the ruinous power's eternal quest to subsume the world in a roiling, turbulent tide of unreasoning change and constant war. It is the beastmen that tear down the elegant elven waystones that hold the power of chaos in check and replace them with herdstones, primitive shrines that corrupt the earth around them. It is the beastmen that hunt down and kill those who would otherwise remain out of the reach of the chaos gods. It is the beastmen who plague the civilizations of mankind, ensuring that their people shall not progress past their primitive states for centuries to come. So it is that the Cloven Wands remain at the forefront of the war against order and light, a war that only continues to escalate to apocalyptic proportions. Campsites are often set up around the sacred herdstones that are scattered throughout the dark forests of the old world. Sometimes referred to as the Chaos Heart, herdstones are sacred to the Beastmen. All manner of offerings are left there to appease and earn the favour of the gods. Weapons, armour, the banners of vanquished foes, and the corpses of mutilated enemies can all be found piled around the base of these stones. The herdstones are always erected in places of magical significance, usually over one of the baleful meteors that brought the Beastmen into being all those ages ago. They are well hidden, and there are almost always Beastmen warherds and Minotaur tribes nearby because of it. The floor of the clearing in which the herdstone stands is often strewn with an ankle-deep carpet of bones, the remains of the captives taken in battle and sacrificed by the brave shamans to the dark glory of the ruinous powers. Most herdstones are located far from human settlements, for no such settlement founded near one has survived more than a single season. They are often found hidden in the darkest and most inaccessible parts of the forests, deep within caves or on mountain tops. Any intrusion within 100 leagues of a herdstone will cause every war herd in the region to descend upon the intruder with unrelenting wrath. Sometimes particularly powerful Minotaurs take up the role of the keepers of the herdstones, becoming the fearful guardians of these most sacred Beastmen shrines. To gather the war bands, a raging signal fire is lit in the centre of the herdstone circle. Often, shamans throw mind-altering herbs upon the blaze, sending up great swaths of strangely coloured smoke curling into the sky. This fire is stoked with wood and carrion, left to burn for days on end. Over the following nights, other Beastmen will slowly gather at the sacred stones, attracted by the fire and the smell of burning fat. Each arriving chieftain scratches his name or mark onto the central stone in the crude Beastman version of the Dark Tongue, known simply as the Beast Tongue, and his warband sets up camp. It is at the herdstones that most of the important celebrations and festivals of the Beastmen take place. They are the rallying points where warbands can meet and join together without fighting breaking out instantly. They are also the place for feasting, most importantly the ritualistic Champions Feast, where the flesh of slain chieftains is consumed by the herd. Like the Skaven, the Beastmen have a difficult time forming the words of the Dark Tongue with their malformed bestial maws. As a result, they use a crude mixture of Dark Tongue, body movements, grunts, clicks and pops, which is collectively called the Beast Tongue. This language sounds more like noise than a sophisticated language, being not much more than an indescribable array of muttering growls and grumbling. Added to this are the shrieks, howls and bleats that Beastmen use to punctuate and emphasise their phrases. Many scholars often have considerable debate whether Beastmen speak a language at all, but regardless of prevailing opinions, Beastmen are still fairly intelligent, despite their brutish aspect, and the fact that some of their kind cannot speak at all. They use their tongue effectively, conveying a wide range of subjects and concepts. The beast tongue is beyond mankind's ability to speak. In the rare instances when Beastmen deign to talk with humans, they use a mix of basic dark tongue, body language and gestures, only descending to beast tongue when frustrated. For their written language, the Beastmen use a simplified form of the phonetic runes used in Dark Tongue to mark herdstones or to leave messages for other members of their herd. These are always crude, for Beastmen lack the precision needed to write clearly. Most Beastmen use their bodily wastes instead, finding the experience far more rewarding than taking the time to scribble something on a rock. The Beastmen build no cities, for order and construction are anathema to them. They roam far and wide, following the scent of fresh meat and hunting down whatever wanders into the ancient hunting grounds that the Beastmen patrol. All the lands of the old world are regarded as these very same hunting grounds. It has always been so since the coming of chaos in a distant and legendary age. The Beastmen are tough and strong, for they must compete with the unimaginable horrors that haunt the woods. Beneath the dark forest canopy, the Beastmen are often the prey of yet more disturbing creatures. Though the Beastmen dwell within the forests, they rarely stay in one location for long. Instead, they move from place to place along ancient paths within the territory of each war herd, occasionally encroaching upon the domains of other tribes or making new paths through the civilized lands of man. Though no sane man can make sense of it, there is sometimes a pattern to these movements, sudden changes of direction, or an uncanny coordination between disparate warbands that hint at a far grander plan. The vast forests of the old world are crossed by a spider's web of paths only the Beastmen know. Where these paths cross, there is to be found a site that is in some way significant to the Cloven Ones. These beast paths are located deep within the forests, far from the towns and highways of man, yet they are far from hidden. Though native to the deep woods, the Beastmen are not naturally creatures of concealment and guile. When passing through the dense woodlands, they simply barge their way through the foliage and trample flat the undergrowth. Over millennia of use, the beast paths have become deep ruts in the ground, strewn with the bones of enemies and other detritus. So dense is the undergrowth that grows on the embankments that the chances are that no human tracker or huntsman seeking a beast path would find one simply by pure coincidence. Any huntsman who have managed to stumble upon a beast path would be extremely wise to turn and flee, for a war herd might be travelling the path, and his own bones may soon be added to those discarded upon it. Occasionally, two Beastmen war herds will run into one another whilst travelling in opposite directions along a beast path. In such cases, the chieftains of each tribe will barge their way to the fore and meet in the centre of the pathway to decide which tribe will stand aside and allow the other to pass. Amidst much bravado, the chieftains will engage in displays of power until one either stands aside or, far more likely, the two come to blows. The ensuing combat will consist of the two chieftains clashing horns and headbutting each other until one is knocked unconscious and the winner determined. The winner's tribe will then pass along the beast path, the gnashing and snarling gore only pausing to relieve themselves upon the prostrate form of the defeated chieftain. When a halt is called, the Beastmen establish temporary sites from which to launch their merciless invasions of the surrounding territory. After these violent events, the Beastmen would then return to their sites and celebrate their victories in overt displays of feasting and brawling. Being highly nomadic, the tribe usually stay in one place only for a short period of time before moving on to find another suitable site in their hunting grounds. Beastmen war bands will often roam for hundreds of miles before setting up camp again, frequently battling other Beastmen for the choicest spots. Beastmen camps are crude affairs, often consisting of little more than a large central bonfire surrounded by a mass of roughly hewn animal skins. Sometimes other skins, often still matted with gore, will be held up by sticks and branches to form makeshift tents. The more powerful beastmen, such as the Minotaurs and the Bestigor, take up the positions closest to the fire and closest to the food. The smaller Ungor are pushed to the extreme outskirts of the ring, and it has been known in winter for the weaker runts to perish. Wild Chaos Hounds prowl around the edges of the campsite, fighting over discarded bones and often preying on the smallest beastmen. In other camps, hounds and hideously mutated spawn, their bulk covered in matted fur, are kept in rough pens of sharpened stakes, where they are taunted and starved until set loose in battle. The treetops all around the encampment are haunted by harpies, twisted beings that from a distance appear as winged and shapely humans. These creatures follow the tribe wherever it goes, attracted by the remains of sacrificed victims scattered about the encampment. They squabble constantly for the choicest pickings of the food the beastmen discard. To stumble upon a beastmen camp is not only to witness a cacophonous vision of hell in full flow, but also to consign oneself to a grisly and extremely unpleasant death. Caves serve a war herd well, so long as they are near a good supply of running water and offer a good view of the surrounding woods. Beastmen follow their food, so once they exhaust an area of fauna and prey, they move on to some other camp. Their constant movement puts them into contact with other beastmen, and battles inevitably ensue. After a particularly successful raid, the war herd will typically celebrate through the night, parading around the fireplace drunkenly, feasting on captives and enjoying the spoils of their victory. By noon the following day, the herd will have abandoned its camp and moved on, discarding anything that cannot easily be carried. The beastmen are locusts upon the world, using up its resources and moving on. The lands that the beastmen use to hunt their prey are known collectively as blood grounds. Every single creature within the beastman's blood ground is prey, whether it flees as do the goblins, evades as do the wood elves, or fights back as do the men. Even the act of marching to war is akin to the hunt, of tracking or stalking the prey. Battle itself is like unto the act of a predator running down its prey, or the clash of rivals fighting to the last to determine the right to leadership and territorial dominance. The beastmen that lurk within the Forest of Shadows, for example, are constantly at war with others who would shelter in its darkness. Every new day, the warherds clash with forest goblins, human bandits, and the shambling hordes of rotten corpses raised by reclusive necromancers who hide from prying eyes in the woods. Because of this, the warherds of the Forest of Shadows, though few in number, are amongst the strongest and most belligerent in the entire old world. When their strength waxes and they dominate their rivals within the Forest of Shadows, they make war upon foes outside of it. It is then that the lands of men truly know the raw strength of the beastmen. Occasionally, the warherds of the Forest of Shadows have fought such successful wars against the others that dwell there that their enemies have been driven out of the forest to plague the lands all about. The wood elves in particular hate the children of chaos with a burning passion, for the beastmen are the opposite of all they stand for. When the two races encounter one another, a raging battle occurs. Should the beastmen prevail, they take perverse delight in chasing the elves down with packs of specially trained hounds. A beastman that catches and eats a wood elf earns the honorific Fey Killer, and little else, for the beastmen find elf flesh stringy and unsatisfying, with barely enough meat on the bone to feed an ungor. Well, that's just about all I have for you today. Be sure to tune in next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at the military might of the Beastmen. But before we start, be sure to comment, like and subscribe so you don't miss an update. And so did the fair village of Sternberg come under the hateful, greed-filled gaze of the beast. These foul beasts were intent on the spilling of blood, the burning of houses, and the butchery of all. Mayhap they wish to gather foodstuffs and drink, but I believe this beyond their bestial intellect. A night of terrors and tragedy it was for the people of Sternberg. Creatures of violence and destruction, the Beastman race is as unreasoning and deadly as the hurricane that tears apart the village, the plague that ravages the land, or the blight that kills the harvest. Yet somehow the Beastmen are far worse, for they have little to do with the natural order of things. The carnage and despair they spread across the land is not part of the eternal cycle of life and death, but a malevolent and deliberate attempt to tear down and despoil everything of beauty, peace, or sanctity, replacing it with filth and ruin. Even when gathered in their torrid encampments, the Beastmen can be seen brawling, shouting, rotting, drinking, or filling their hairy bellies with raw flesh. They are vital and virile creatures that are never truly still. When it comes for the Beastman hordes to launch their invasions upon the lands of mankind, the herds gather around a single holy site and form themselves into large hordes called war herds. From here, all the chieftains of the tribes challenge each other for the right to lead the herd into battle. Once a leader is chosen, the brave shamans of all the tribes conduct ritual sacrifices to their loathsome gods. Smelling the spilling of fresh blood, minotaurs, centaurs, and all manner of chaos creatures are seen joining the Beastmen on their hunt. As daylight nears, the ritual begins its final climax. From the shrouded tree line, the atonal droning of war horns sound, accompanied by the dolorous, arrhythmic pounding of mighty drums made from the flayed skins of defeated foes. Soon, massed figures emerge from the mists, and the horde becomes visible in all its terrible glory. The tactics employed by the Beastmen are not the practice drills of many other races, but the inherent guile of a pack of wild animals stalking and encircling its prey. They sense weakness and smell fear, surging forward for the kill and falling upon their prey in an orgy of butchery. The coming of the horde is always presaged by a cacophonous braying, as if to amplify their already deafening war cries. The Beastmen employ war horns fashioned from the tusks of forest creatures or the horns of slain rivals. They carry a bewildering array of banners adorned with the heads of fallen enemies and daubed with the crude runes that identify each herd. Such banners are used to increase the Beastmen's stature, ensuring that even distant enemies can see the dominance and strength of the bearers. At the centre of the horde are heavily armoured elite Bestigors, equipped with huge axes taken from the treasures stacked at the base of each herdstone. These Beastmen hack into the enemy as farmers scythe down their wheat. They will fight to the death to take the banners of their foes, trampling enemy standards into the mud as the bulk of the horde follows in their bloody wake. All the while the Gore and Ungor stalk through the undergrowth to encircle and hem in the enemy battle line, moving into the most advantageous positions before springing effective ambushes upon the flanks and rear of the enemy army. Many a gunnery or archer battalion has believed itself safe behind sharpened stakes and defensible positions, only to find that the Beastmen had them surrounded from the start. Alongside the war herd come the Minotaurs, driven to such extremes of violence by the scent of blood they cannot wait until the day is won to feast upon their victims. They gorge themselves on the flesh of their dying foes, even as battle rages all around. The beasts of the wild come too, Above the battlefield, ragged flocks of harpies screech and squabble over the remains of the dead. Twisted chaos spawn thrash and writhe as the raw power of chaos surges through their veins. Even larger creatures accompany the horde, terrifying cygors, rock-clad giants of the forests, and bloated, betentacled things that lurk within the forest bogs and can swallow men whole. When the herds form up for battle, it is not as small, ragged bands, but as fully armed and battle-ready armies, united by the will of the chieftain. The sight is sufficient to strike terror into even the bravest warriors, for such a menagerie of horrors can consume all before it. Once a Beastmen horde is on the warpath, nothing short of total annihilation will stop these foul creatures. The beast lords of the war herds are hairy, muscle-bound brutes, possessed of a raw and savage might. Upon the battlefield, a beast lord is a force of untold destruction, gouging and butchering with horn, blade and claw. Their thick, hairy skulls are crowned with magnificent sets of horns, as sharp and hard as any blade, and their robust and heavily thewed bodies are covered with scar tissue and crudely rendered tattoos. Each beast lord has many charges. These wargor are the leaders of the war herds, but they give no regard to the concerns of their tribe. They care not how their underlings are fed or how disputes are settled. The only thing the wargor concern themselves with is battle. Day and night they brood and plot the myriad ways they will enact their race's hatred of man, the violence they will wreak upon his flesh, and the defilement they will heap upon his temples. Doom bulls are the strongest and most ferocious of their kind, towering bull-headed and cloven-hooved beasts, almost as broad as they are tall. Consumed by blood greed, the doom bulls will lay waste to their prey in orgy of slaughter, maiming everything within reach of their gargantuan axes. Gore bulls are the lesser leaders of the Minotaur tribes. Although no less terrifying in combat, they stand a full head or more over the largest Minotaurs and are more than capable of carving a path through the enemy single-handedly. Great Bray shamans are the practitioners of magic within a war herd. When the beastmen go to war, the great Bray shamans wield their powers to wreak terrible devastation upon the foe. Their coruscating magic transforming soldiers into hideous new forms, summoning the creatures of the forest, both large and small, to bite and rend, or driving enemy mounts to buck their riders to the ground, to gore and trample their masters. The great Bray shamans' less able underlings are the Bray shaman. They are born into magic, and they wield it with an instinctive ease. A miasma of fell sorcery surrounds them, and when their wrath is roused, reality itself distorts and bends to their will. The Bestigor are the strongest and meanest of all the war herd's foot soldiers, and are prone to acts of excessive violence. In battle, Bestigors form a solid, armoured mass of muscle and iron that charges forward, huge axes levelled, ready to hew the foe limb from limb and trample his broken body beneath their unshod hooves. The Minotaurs, also known as Bulgors, are massive bull-headed monstrosities that constantly hunger for blood and meat. Twice the height of a man and substantially more muscular, their horns can eviscerate with a single thrust. When called to war, Minotaurs charge with a thundering impact and hack apart their hapless victims with formidable weapons. The Gore form the great mass of the war herds. Their appearance varies, but all combine bestial features with those of a man. They have the savage fangs of a wolf and muscular bodies, both well suited to enacting the violence and warfare that they crave. To face a horde of Gore is to face anarchy and mayhem. Rowdy and undisciplined, they bray, bark and bawl an unceasing cacophony that fills the hearts of men with dread. The Ungor are more dexterous than the Gore, and possessed of a wiry strength that makes them more than a match for humans. They live to murder and despoil all that is wholesome, and are extremely cruel and spiteful creatures. Ungor take to the field in large herds, arming themselves with stout spears with which to impale their prey, and crude shields to protect their grotesque bodies. Meanwhile, Ungor raiders are those tasked with the role of hunting out enemies for the war herds to prey upon. They have knowledge of the wilderness that is unsurpassed by even the most intelligent Gore, and it is they who sow the seeds of mayhem that soon blossom into full-blown destruction as the rest of the war herd falls upon their victims. The lowest of the low, even the Ungor look down upon the Brays for their lack of horns and status among the war herd. They rarely live long, being the very last to get fed. The Brays take their name from the braying, whinnying, whooping cacophony they make when they band together to eat or kill. Upon the thermals of the sacrificial pyres soar the harpies, winged beasts with savage beauty. They are creatures of cruel temperament, that is for sure, for flocks of harpies delight in tormenting their victims and feasting upon raw flesh. Centaurs are drunken, jealous creatures and carry out extreme acts of cruelty and violence on the battlefield. Each centaur carries either a crude spear or horn and wears limited amounts of chainmail and cloth, while their shields and decorations display both skull and chaos motifs. Rising up from their clawed hooves, their muscular torsos lead to a cruel-looking head from which protrudes large ribbed horns. The chariots of the Beastmen are ramshackle constructions built from heavy pieces of lumber, scavenged from the ruins of man's buildings, drawn by boars or other fouler monstrosities whose brute strength and ferocity far outmatch that of mere horses. A Beastman chariot inflicts terrible damage as it charges into the foe. Brutish and bloodthirsty beasts, the warhounds of chaos are tireless hunters built of little more than muscle and fang. On the battlefield, the Beastmen release these feral beasts to intercept the forward elements of the enemy army. Packs of Chaos Warhounds will hunt down and pounce upon enemy skirmishers and scouts, bearing them into the ground and ripping them to pieces in their desperate desire to kill. Chaos Spawn are creatures which have become so mutated through their servitude to chaos they have devolved into twisted and insane abominations. Those seeking immortality and power through demonhood face the constant possibility of being reduced to Chaos Spawn, either by accumulating too many mutations or being cast aside by their Chaos patrons as unworthy. The Children of Chaos. Some of the most disturbing sights upon the battlefield are the cavorting children of the Beastmen, some born to the Beast Women, whilst others given up by their human parents. They prance and play amidst the chaos of battle, often herded by matronly Beast Women. War herds based suitably close to the mountains may be fortunate enough to entice dragon ogres down from their slumber with the promise of battle. These ancient and powerful beasts reside in the remote peaks of the old world, and only the fiercest fighting and the mightiest of storms can rouse them. Jabberslaves are some of the most ancient creatures of the world, and are certainly the most vile. They're an unwholesome union of toad, sludge drake and insect, a creature so unearthly and grotesque that even the clearest of nature's pools will never reflect that abomination. Sentient creatures fare even worse, with many humans known to die of sheer shock or madness that the appearance of this creature invariably induces. Bellowing primitive war cries from maws crammed with rotten, jagged fangs, the chaos giant tribes lumber to war. Corrupted, by the hideous powers they worship. These beings are twisted perversions of their former selves, monsters dedicated to the killing for chaos. Well, that's just about all I have for you today. Be sure to tune in next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are doing something a bit different. Today we are learning about the doom that came to Sarnath, an H.P. Lovecraft short. But before we start, be sure to comment, like and subscribe so you don't miss an update. There is in the land of Nar a vast still lake that is fed by no stream and out of which no stream flows. 10,000 years ago there stood by its shore the mighty city of Sarnath, but Sarnath stands there no more. It is told that in the immemorial years when the world was young, before ever the men of Sarnath came to the land of Nar, another city stood beside the lake, the grey stone city of Ib, which was old as the lake itself, and peopled with beings not pleasing to behold. Very odd and ugly were these beings, as indeed are most beings of a world yet inchoate and rudely fashioned. It is written on the brick cylinders of Cadethron that the beings of Ib were in hue as green as the lake and the mists that rise above it, that they had bulging eyes, pouting, flabby lips and curious ears, and were without voice. It is also written that they descended one night from the moon in a mist, they and the vast still lake and grey stone city Ib. However this may be, it is certain that they worshipped a sea-green stone idol chiselled in the likeness of Bokrug, the great water lizard, before which they danced horribly when the moon was gibbous. And it is written in the papyrus of Larnac that they one day discovered fire, and thereafter kindled flames on many ceremonial occasions. But not much is written of these beings, because they lived in very ancient times, and man is young and knows little of the very ancient living things. After many aeons, men came to the land of Nar, dark shepherd folk with their fleecy flocks, who built Thra, Larnac and Cadethron on the winding river Eye. And certain tribes, more hardy than the rest, pushed on to the border of the lake and built Sarnath, at a spot where precious metals were found in the earth. Not far from the grey city of Ib did the wandering tribes lay the first stones of Sarnath, and at the beings of Ib they marvelled greatly. But with their marvelling was mixed hate, for they thought it not meet that beings of such aspect should walk about the world of men at dusk. Nor did they like the strange sculptures upon the grey monoliths of Ib, for these sculptures were terrible with great antiquity. Why the beings and the sculptures lingered so late in the world, even until the coming of men, none can tell, unless it was because the land of Nar is very still and remote from most other lands both of waking and of dream. As the men of Sarnath beheld more of the beings of Ib, their hate grew, and it was not less because they found the beings weak and soft as jelly to the touch of stones and spears and arrows. So one day the young warriors and slingers and the spearmen and the bowmen marched against Ib, and slew all the inhabitants thereof, pushing the queer bodies into the lake with long spears, because they did not wish to touch them. and because they did not like the grey sculptured monoliths of Ib, they cast these also into the lake, wondering from the greatness of the labour, however the stones were brought from afar, as they must have been, since there is naught like them in all the land of Nar, or in the lands adjacent. Thus, of the very ancient city of Ib was nothing spared, save the sea-green stone idol chiselled in the likeness of Bokrug, the water lizard. This the young warriors took back with them to Sarnath as a symbol of conquest over the old gods and beings of Ib, and a sign of leadership in Nar. But on the night after it was set up in the temple, a terrible thing must have happened, for weird lights were seen over the lake, and in the morning the people found the idol gone, and the high priest Taranish lying dead, as from some fear unspeakable. And before he died, Taranish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite with coarse, shaky strokes the sign of doom. After Taranish, there were many high priests in Sarnath, but never was the sea-green stone idol found. And many centuries came and went, wherein Sarnath prospered exceedingly, so that only priests and old women remembered what Tarnish had scrawled upon the altar of chrysolite. Betwixt Sarnath and the city of Larnak arose a caravan route, and the precious metals from the earth were exchanged for other metals and rare cloths and jewels and books and tools, for artificers and all things of luxury that are known to the people who dwell along the winding river Ai and beyond. So Sarnath waxed mighty and learned and beautiful, and sent forth conquering armies to subdue the neighbouring cities, and in time there sate upon a throne in Sarnath the kings of all the land of Nar and of many lands adjacent. The wonder of the world and the pride of all mankind was Sarnath the Magnificent. Of polished desert quarried marble were its walls, in height 300 cubits and in breadth 75, so that chariots might pass each other as men drave them along the top. For full 500 stadia did they run, being open only on the side toward the lake, where a green stone sea wall kept back the waves that rose oddly once a year at the festival of the destroying of Ib. In Sarnath were 50 streets from the lake to the gates of the caravans, and 50 more intersecting them. With onyx were they paved, save those whereon the horses and camels and elephants trod, which were paved with granite. And the gates of Sarnath were as many as the landward ends of the streets, each of bronze and flanked by the figures of lions and elephants, carven from some stone no longer known among men. The houses of Sarnath were of glazed brick and chalcedony, each having its walled garden and crystal lakelet. With strange art were they builded, for no other city had houses like them, and travellers from Thra and Larnak and Kadathron marvelled at the shining domes wherewith they were surmounted. But more marvellous still were the palaces and the temples and the gardens made by Zokar the olden king. There were many palaces, the least of which were mightier than any in Thra or Larnak or Kadathron. So high were they that one within might sometimes fancy himself beneath only the sky. Yet, when lighted with torches dipped in the oil of Dotha, their walls shewed vast paintings of kings and armies, of a splendour at once inspiring and stupefying to the beholder. Many were the pillars of the palaces, all of tinted marble, and carven into designs of surpassing beauty. And in most of the palaces the floors were mosaics of beryl and lapis lazuli and sardonyx and carbuncle and other choice materials, so disposed that the beholder might fancy himself walking over the beds of the rarest flowers. And there were likewise fountains which cast scented waters about in pleasing jets, arranged with cunning art. Outshining all others was the palace of the kings of Nar, and of the lands adjacent. On a pair of golden, crouching lions rested the throne, many steps above the gleaming floor, and it was wrought of one piece of ivory, though no man lives who knows whence so vast a piece could have come. In that palace there were also many galleries, and many amphitheatres where lions and men and elephants battled at the pleasure of the kings. Sometimes the amphitheatres were flooded with water conveyed from the lake in mighty aqueducts, and then were enacted stirring sea fights or combats betwixt swimmers and deadly marine things. Lofty and amazing were the 17 tower-like temples of Sarnath, fashioned of a bright, multicoloured stone not known elsewhere. A full 1,000 cubits high stood the greatest among them, wherein the high priests dwelt, with a magnificence scarce less than that of the kings. On the ground were halls as vast and splendid as those of the palaces, where gathered throngs in worship of Zokalar and Zamash and Lobon, the chief gods of Sarnath, whose incensed enveloped shrines were as the thrones of monarchs. Not like the icons of other gods were those of Zokalar and Tamash and Lobon, for so close to life were they that one might swear the graceful bearded gods themselves sate on the ivory thrones. And, upending steps of shining zircon, was the tower chamber, where from the high priests looked out over the city and the plains and the lake by day, and at the cryptic moon and significant stars and planets, and their reflections in the lake by night. Here was done the very secret and ancient rite in detestation of Bokrug, the water lizard, and here rested the altar of chrysolite which bore the doom scroll of Taranish. Wonderful likewise were the gardens made by Zokar, the olden king. In the centre of Sarnath they lay covering a great space and encircled by a high wall, and they were surmounted by a mighty dome of glass, through which shone the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was clear, and from which were hung fulgent images of the sun and moon and stars and planets when it was not clear. In summer the gardens were cooled with fresh odorous breezes skillfully wafted by fans, and in winter they were heated with concealed fires, so that in these gardens it was always spring. There ran little streams over bright pebbles, dividing meads of green and gardens of many hues, and spanned by a multitude of bridges. Many were the waterfalls in their courses, and many were the lilied lakelets into which they expanded. Over the streams and lakelets rode white swans, whilst the music of rare birds chimed in with the melody of the waters. In ordered terraces rose the green banks, adorned here and there with bowers of vines and sweet blossoms, and seats and benches of marble and porphyry. And there were many small shrines and temples where one might rest or pray to the small gods. Each year there was celebrated in Sarnath the feast of the destroying of Ib, at which time wine, song, dancing and merriment of every kind abounded. Great honours were then paid to the shades of those who had annihilated the odd, ancient beings, and the memory of those beings and of their elder gods was derided by dancers and lunatists crowned with roses from the gardens of Zokar. And the kings would look out over the lake and curse the bones of the dead that lay beneath it. At first the high priests liked not these festivals, for there had descended amongst them queer tales of how the sea-green icon had vanished, and how Taranish had died from fear and left a warning. And they said that from their high tower they sometimes saw lights beneath the waters of the lake. But as many years passed, without calamity, even the priests laughed and cursed and joined in the orgies of the feasters. Indeed, they had not themselves, in their high tower, often performed the very ancient and secret rite of detestation of Bokrug, the water lizard. And 1,000 years of riches and delight passed over Sarnath, wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Gorgeous beyond thought was the feast of the 1,000th year of the destroying of Ib. For a decade had it been talked of in the land of Nar, and as it drew nigh, there came to Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants, men from Thra, Larnak and Kadathron, and all the cities of Nar and the lands beyond. Before the marble walls, on the appointed night, were pitched the pavilions of princes and the tents of travellers, and all the shore resounded with the song of happy revellers. Within his banquet hall reclined Nargis High, the king, drunken with ancient wine from the vaults of conquered Nath, and surrounded by feasting nobles and hurrying slaves. There were eaten many strange delicacies at that feast: peacocks from the isles of Naril in the middle ocean, young goats from the distant hills of Implan, heels of camels from the Nazik desert, nuts and spices from Sidathrin, groves and pearls from wave-washed Tal, dissolved in the vinegar of Thra. Of sauces there were an untold number, prepared by the subtlest of cooks in all Nar, and suited to the palate of every feaster. But most prized of all the viands were the great fishes from the lake, each of vast size and served up on golden platters set with rubies and diamonds. Whilst the king and his nobles feasted within the palace, and viewed the crowning dish as it awaited them on golden platters, others feasted elsewhere. In the tower of the great temple the priests held revels, and in pavilions without the walls the princes of neighbouring lands made merry. And it was the high priest Naika who first saw the shadows that descended from the gibbous moon into the lake, and the damnable green mists that arose from the lake to meet the moon and to shroud in a sinister haze the towers and the domes of fated Sarnath. Thereafter those in the towers and without the walls beheld strange lights on the water, and saw that the grey rock Akurian, which was wont to rear high above and near the shore, was almost submerged. And fear grew vaguely, yet swiftly, so that the princes of Larnak and of Far Rokol took down and folded their tents and pavilions and departed for the river Ai, though they scarce knew the reason for their departing. Then, close to the hour of midnight, all the bronze gates of Sarnath burst open and emptied forth a frenzied throng that blackened the plain, so that all the visiting princes and travellers fled away in fright. For on the faces of this throng was writ a madness born of horror unendurable, and on their tongues were words so terrible that no hearer paused for proof. Men whose eyes were wild with fear shrieked aloud of the sight within the king's banquet hall, where through the windows were seen no longer the forms of Nargis High and his nobles and slaves, but horde of indescribable green voiceless things with bulging eyes, pouting flabby lips and curious ears, things which danced horribly, bearing in their paws golden platters set with rubies and diamonds, containing uncouth flames. And the princes and travellers, as they fled from the doomed city of Sarnath on horses and camels and elephants, looked again upon the mist-begetting lake, and saw the grey rock Akurian was quite submerged. Through all the land of Nar and the lands adjacent spread the tales of those who had fled from Sarnath, and caravans sought that accursed city and its precious metals no more. It was long ere any traveller went thither, and even then only the brave and adventurous young men of distant Felona dared make the journey. Adventurous young men of yellow hair and blue eyes who are no kin to the men of Nar. These men indeed went to the lake to view Sarnath, but though they found the vast still lake itself and the grey rock Akurian, which rears high above it near the shore, they beheld not the wonder of the world and pride of all mankind. Where once had risen walls of 300 cubits and towers yet higher, now stretched only the marshy shore. And where once had dwelt 50 millions of men, now crawled only the detestable green water lizard. Not even the mines of precious metal remained, for doom had come to Sarnath. But, half buried in the rushes, was spied a curious green idol of stone. An exceedingly ancient idol, coated with seaweed and chiselled in the likeness of Bokrug, the great water lizard. That idol, enshrined in the high temple of Larnak, was subsequently worshipped beneath the gibbous moon throughout the land of Nar. That's just about all I have for you today. Be sure to tune in next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we're going to be discussing collecting theory, what it is, why it's important, and how to apply it to the hobby. But before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so don't miss an update. So, what is collecting theory? I've been collecting and painting miniatures for decades, but it's only within the last 5 years or so that I've genuinely considered what I like to call collecting theory. I like to include a slice of this theory in each series and have done so since the start of building a Realms of Chaos army back in 2016. But what is collecting theory? Is it just a wishy-washy way of saying collect models that you like? Or is it a more completist attitude? Let's unpack the idea and see what we find. When I say collecting theory, what I mean to say is the way I collect miniatures, but it doesn't quite have such a nice ring to it as collecting theory. To get an idea of the way I collect miniatures, we need to look back at my collecting going way back and how this has changed throughout my life. I started collecting miniatures with Battle Masters in 1992 and used this box set as the basis for a few different armies. I had a large undead army made up of most of the Empire figures from the set, bolstered by Hero Quest skeletons and mummies, the Sorcerer and Gargoyle. When I came across Space Crusade, I also then started a Chaos Renegade force and an Orc army. It is worth noting, this was early days. My painting was not a patch on what it is today. Most things were a shade of black or highlighted and a few details picked out. This I would consider collecting in its loosest form, i.e. just amassing models and fighting battles with a selection of friends. In those early days, I kept a running tally of the battles I fought and accrued quite a storied history for each army. Unfortunately, I have since lost that transcript in multiple computer changes, transfers of data and reformats. Anyway, with the advent of Gorka Morka, I added several box sets worth of models to my orcs and started buying up second-hand models from a local wargames store called South Sea Models, where my friend Richard and his dad took me one weekend with some pocket money. It was there that I discovered a love of classically painted miniatures with glorious gloss coats of varnish. I would visit Games Workshop in this time, of course. However, I found it a lackluster experience. The staff were rather too keen to make a sale and never interested in the thing I had just painted from years gone by. A common occurrence that is still borne out in my dealings with Games Workshop stuff today, on the rare occasion that I visit a store. As time went on, I started to acquire my friends' collections as they dipped out of the hobby. My friends Sam and Kieran both selling me their orcs, tyrannids and space marines. Note, I was still in the heady days of amassing as many miniatures as I could, with little grand plan to actually paint them all. Some of them languished for years or even decades in my collection. The tyrannids found their way to my brother, whilst the orcs found a home in my own orc army. The marines meanwhile got converted in part into Chaos Renegades. Once I had secured a job and had some money coming in, I started to spend more time on the computer, playing games and eventually competing in tournaments online. I left my miniatures here at this point for a while, boxed up and shoved under the bed, above the cupboard and in corners of my room at my parents' house. I wouldn't touch a miniature for another half a decade or so. I got caught up in work, games, dating, etc. I travelled extensively for a couple of years. It was only when I returned to the UK from this self-imposed exile that I picked up miniatures again in earnest. When I returned to the hobby, my collecting style had radically changed. Rather than picking up just about everything I could afford, or that fell in my lap, I went about methodically collecting all the Nergle miniatures and proxies I could find. At the time, there were no 3D printers. Proxy models were invariably resin and cast by solo outfits that rarely lasted long, so it was crucial to snap things up whenever and wherever they were found. I got some nice miniatures, but once again, I I would end up leaving my collection behind when I started my new job. I got consumed by my work, and for a good year or so I didn't touch a miniature. That is, until I moved in with my then girlfriend in a rental a few miles from my work. We had an empty old loft space with a workbench that the owner called tinkering room. This was swiftly adopted and turned into the man cave, from where legions were born. I would sell off a lot of my early collection, only keeping a few metal renegades and my orc collection, foolishly thinking that I could simply start again with a new army and not let it get out of hand. In those early days, a decade ago or so, I was convinced I could keep my collecting under control. As usual, I was wrong. This time around I concentrated on collecting whole series or releases of miniatures. For instance, every Metal Plaguebearer model, including the unreleased versions, completing my Metal Chaos Renegade collection, each of the pre-slaughter releases of Chaos Warriors, and so on. Of course, my painting speed could never outpace my collecting. Before I knew it, I was drowning in lead and resin again. Having been to various places with work, I've had a couple of years worth of time over the last decade where I haven't been able to put brush to metal. But, all things considered, I've been quite consistent in my output. Then, in 2021, everything changed. I bought a house. With this new goal and drain on my resources, I promptly quit the collecting part of the hobby and started a whole new chapter, building and painting. Whilst I had been building and painting miniatures whilst collecting them, I would spend just as much time browsing for new miniatures as actually building and painting the ones I already had. This was a revelation. I got more miniatures painted that year than a good portion of my previous hobby career. Of course, the house isn't going anywhere and still needs money to keep it in a decent state, so I figured once I have paid off the house, I can get back to collecting. In the meantime, however, I have more than a couple of thousand figures to paint. So, as you can see, my hobby journey has played out in several quite distinct stages. The first, amassing anything and everything I could, followed by a distillation and consolidation around specific releases and collections. Then, a period of completion. I suspect this is quite a familiar story to many of you in some form or another. Everyone is different though, so each of these phases could be longer or shorter depending on the army, need or desire. Now, let's go on to why I think this matters. I think it's critical to your longevity in the hobby for you to realise in which stage you are currently in your hobby journey. If you can identify that you are simply in an amassing phase, and for whatever reason enjoy purchasing miniatures, that's fine. Eventually you'll find you have collected enough. Once you come to the end of this phase, you may feel overwhelmed or even resentful of the amount of money you paid, or time you spent on something you no longer love. One of the great things about collecting miniatures though, is that if you really need to offload them, there is always someone willing to pay for them. Now you may not recover the full price you paid, unless you're a particularly gifted painter or collector of particularly rare miniatures, but you do have a good chance of at least recouping some of your losses. It's not all doom and gloom though. A consolidation phase can be quite cathartic. You can figure out what you truly like about the miniatures you want to keep, and this might spur you on to paint them or even start collecting once more. You might feel like you want to explore the lore of your collection, create art, or otherwise be creative in a way complementary to the hobby. I myself don't really collect books or magazines anymore, instead choosing to concentrate on the creation of my own worlds and background, something which someday I would like to release as an alternative to regular wargaming. I think the key thing to note here is that you don't need to be bound to one manufacturer, which is what we'll go on to look at next. One of the best things about the hobby is the sheer variety of miniatures available to us today. They can be categorised in a multitude of ways: style, scale, lore, even the material they are made of. It's worth noting that this choice doesn't always have to be a choice. The release of Rogue Trader decades ago beautifully blended sci-fi and fantasy tropes in a glorious mess of style and colour. With that in mind, this is where I would like to start when talking about building armies. Building armies in the world of our choice is probably the main reason why we enjoy this hobby. A key component of this is the theme of your army. Is it a warband of misfits, a troop of travelling knights, a team of specialists, or a horde of green idiots? You decide, but keep in mind several things when collecting. Scale. Scale isn't as important as some may think. The classic 1/72 scale for miniatures has long been a standard size. It equates to a 6-foot tall man being 25mm tall. Other scales have hung their coat on this, such as Games Workshop's much loved heroic scale, which made heads and hands much larger and thus easier to paint. 28mm gave the heroically huge heads a more proportionate look. But let's stop there for a moment. What are we really concerned about when talking about the scale of miniatures? Most, I would suspect, would be worried about how these miniatures fit together in either a regiment or a unit of some kind. Interestingly, the difference between a 25mm and a 28mm model would be the same as a 6-foot man standing next to a 6'8" man. Statistically, of course, there are far fewer 6'8" men lurking about, but it's not outside the realm of possibility that they would serve together or be press-ganged along with the other men in the village. So, if we take into account statistical outliers for size, you can see scale isn't that big of an issue. Style. Style is important. There are a few different ways to employ style in our collecting, and it can be employed in ways you may not have realised. For instance, several miniatures painted in different colours and wearing different garb may look all the more cohesive when standing on similarly decorated bases. Collecting a series of miniatures from different manufacturers and sculpting additional clothing, armour or weaponry on them can be a great project, in an effort to bring them together in a style you wish to present them in. There is always disparity on purpose, the use of drastically different miniatures to promote a chaotic or disorganised feel to the unit or army. This can be used to great effect in horde armies like Beastmen or Orcs and Goblins, where madness runs rampant. So, again, style doesn't have to be an issue that limits your collecting either. Weaponry. Weaponry can be an issue. Now, if you play tournaments or have a competitive gaming group, you will want the correct weapons on your miniatures. The casual gamer or collector, on the other hand, may think nothing of arming his beastmen with a plethora of weapons that make no tactical sense. I like to try and keep units cohesive by arming them with the same, or at least similar weapons. So, a unit of Chaos Dwarves might be armed with great weapons. In this mix, I would have anything that could be wielded with 2 hands: flails, axes, large swords, and the like. In this way, they automatically look like they are organised, whereas in my Beastmen Army, I have gore units with a mixture of weapons to emphasise their bestial nature. So, weapons can be important, if you deem them so. Design aesthetic. Another biggie. This can sometimes override other considerations. This can be perfectly summed up in the fact that there are numerous iterations of miniatures from edition to edition that have weapon changes, but still have the iconography and design trappings of the previous edition. This is what I would consider design aesthetic, rather than style. To fix this, you could field separate units, distinguishable by their different kit and addition characteristics. Alternatively, you could field them together and foot the bill for the painkillers used to treat the OCD-induced headache that may occur if you are prone to these kinds of things. Again, it's up to you. Common colours. Colours are big, so big in fact every miniature needs them, even if only 2 in a base colour and a highlight. Let's face it, if you play with unpainted miniatures, you are a complete heathen. Colours can be used just the same as any other distinguishing feature on your miniatures. Colours can solve a lot of your issues, especially when it comes to different manufacturers' miniatures, which may look drastically different despite toting the same race and equipment characteristics. Gotta love them colours. Proxy models. One of my favourite topics in the hobby is proxy models. When you just have to have that unit, but eBay prices are astronomical, or you want to diversify the look of that regiment that only had a 4 sculpt release. I'm thinking Chaos Dwarf Axemen here. Proxy models are where you go. Not only that, but many proxy models have different equipment and armour, which makes them even more versatile to the budding general. The addition of proxy models to a force can really amp up the look and feel of an army. Your opponents will probably be fascinated as to what you are fielding and where you got them from. Of course, there is the inevitable problems faced with strict tournament rules or particularly picky or competitive opponents. Proxy models, a great way to expand your forces for less. Collections. A great way to collect miniatures is to do so by collections or releases. Often, a release will have numerous different miniatures in distinguishable poses and stances. If you're anything like me and dislike the look of entire units ranked up neatly in exactly the same pose, then you'll probably appreciate collecting by collections. Collecting by collection really appeals to the completist, the keen eBay or trade page watcher, and those afflicted with any kind of compulsive collecting disorder. Personally, I field units of unique miniatures exclusively, unless going for a specific nostalgic look with monopose plastics, for instance. Collections are clearly where it's at. Quantity versus quality. Instead of worrying about any of the aforementioned, you could simply collect what is rare, expensive, or simply interests you the most historically. There are hundreds of miniatures out there that are unreleased, resin masters, or limited editions, and it doesn't take too long to find them with a quick search of So Demons or collecting Citadel miniatures for the old Games Workshop releases. Nostalgia is another factor that could be considered when collecting. What really ticks the box when looking for new miniatures? Perhaps something that you saw when you were younger and could never have. Something in the right style, or a classic extra large banner held aloft by a brave knight. Nostalgia meshes quite nicely with proxy models, as sometimes it's seeing something quite unlike anything else, but in an old style that can trigger this feeling. Old school miniatures and Nightmare Games, for instance, have built their business model entirely on evoking these feelings with beautiful new miniatures. Nostalgia. Yeah. Conjugate collecting. Similar to conjugate weight training in that you build all the tenets of strength in conjunction with each other, Conjugate Collector combines all of the above into a wonderful mess. We've looked at half a dozen or more different specific categories of collecting, and I'm sure there are more, but this is the one that I truly recommend. To collect in this way, you may field a unit using each collecting style, blend several together, or even all of the above to create something really quite unique. A perfect example of this would be my Nergling army. I have 3 units of metal plague bearers made from each release of the unit type. There were 11 in each release, so in each unit I've added a proxy model in a similar style for the newest release, a champion of Nergal / Chaos Thug in another, and a Chaos Warrior with a plague bearer's head to the final unit, to create 3 units of 12. I have a unit of Nergal Chaos Warriors made up of the complete release of 12 Nergal Chaos Warriors, supported by 3 proxy models and a Death Guard icon bearer from 40k converted to be a standard bearer. In another unit I have 12 Blight Kings made up from Heartbreaker miniatures, resins, metal models from Reaper and plastics from the Hate board game. To complement this, I've used the same quick-shade glossy varnish and oxide effects across the force, based them the same, and built complementary movement trays, which, when combined, brings the whole force together and makes them look entirely cohesive. In this way, you can create something that looks out of the norm, something interesting and different. This is how Games Workshop thrilled and enthralled a generation of wargamers in the 80s and 90s. Every now and then a beautiful conversion would appear standing amongst the rank and file, soloing across the battlefield or crashing through the ramparts of a castle. This nostalgia is what we are trying to create with our armies. A yearning for the good old days, a return to that flicker of excitement when you saw something not quite familiar, and you had to search your memory or magazines for where you saw some of those parts before. I guess this is part of the beauty of the hobby for me, trying to keep the old ways alive, not only through my collecting, but also in my efforts here on the channel. The problem with Age of Sigmar. I've never played Age of Sigmar. I'm sure it's very good and all. However, I have no interest in it. The style of the digital art strikes me as lackluster at best, and enthuses me less and less as I grow older. The design of the miniatures is lazy and uninteresting. The game itself is a game of giant miniatures, mighty dragons, overpowered cavalry, supreme beings and even gods. This isn't Warhammer, and it's not designed to be. It was designed to drag the player base kicking and screaming into a new world, something somewhat familiar, but fundamentally different. You can't blame Games Workshop, however. The youth of the early 2000s and 2010s has been fed a diet of instant gratification and instant reward. It can't be surprising that the hobby has had to rebrand itself as a quick pick up and play game that can be polished off in less than an hour. Digital art, the dross of the internet. A whole generation of kids were brought up on the idea that not only could they become famous on YouTube by simply uploading content every day, but also that they could become fantastic digital artists on the plethora of art websites that pander to kids and their drama. This led to a wholesale jump from traditional mediums in the early 2000s, which left us with millions of mediocre digital artists. A trend that passed on to just about every creative endeavour since. So bad was it that during the late 2000s, your project faced miserable failure without a cutesy anime artistic style. During this dark age, places like DeviantArt and similar continued their push for more and more content in an effort to balance their ad revenues with the cost of servers. Other than me lamenting the loss of traditional media to a few stalwarts that hold their ground while standing in quicksand, there isn't much we can do about this. The new HeroQuest game is a perfect example of just what can go so terribly wrong when you fundamentally don't understand the essence of a game, when you redesign and re-release it. The miniatures in Age of Sigmar are quite unlike that of yesteryear too. The miniatures are, of course, getting less and less miniature. Scale creep has created monstrous entities from what used to be simply modest-sized little fellas. Ghazghkull Thraka is a great example of this. From a lowly pirate-esque figure made of a few grams of lead posing on a small round base in the 80s, to something larger than a dreadnought dominating a base that could easily hold a giant in 2020. Not only this, but the tragic, lazy use of copy-paste and rotate or mirror in CAD makes my soul weep for those miniatures that came before, which were beautifully sculpted from putty and clay. Truly, these were gentler times. Whilst a decent-sized Warhammer army used to be 100 or more miniatures, it is now a fifth of that. Long gone are the days when you can see a game with hundreds of goblins being slaughtered by knights of the realm. Instead, we are limited in scope by the huge creatures of Age of Sigmar and the titans of Apocalypse games, where huge creatures and gods battle it out across an interchangeable backdrop. Whilst everyone loves a centrepiece miniature, you have to draw the line somewhere. You can't simply have the whole army made up of centerpieces, otherwise they aren't centerpieces anymore. Centerpieces, which leads us nicely into tactics. The reduction in troops and the concentration on large models leaves us with little to no tactical challenges. A mission that could have been completed by 2 crack teams of 10 commandos can now be completed by a single invincible robot standing in the open, soaking up firepower from all directions. What the game has lost is nuance. A concentration on more and more powerful weaponry and miniatures that impresses on the battlefield and in the display cabinet, but requires little to no tactical planning or overarching strategy. Interestingly, this has been covered in multiple videos that highlight pricing versus strategic value. A confusing conflation of tabletop value with monetary value. A system that is as horrendous as it is ingenious. Pricing. A truly divisive subject, if ever there was one. On one hand, we have the luxury product. Don't buy it if you can't afford it team. On the other hand, you have the I would rather buy miniatures from alternative manufacturers, or, heaven forbid, recasts to play the game I love. Unfortunately, rarely do these sides meet, as Games Workshop has long held firm to their no proxies or recasts rule in most stores and certainly in tournaments. Whilst I can fully understand the rule in regards to recasts, there is little to no reason other than cornering the market for not allowing proxies. Fascinating as it may seem to some of you sprogs out there, but White Dwarf used to be a haven of heavy metal bands, adverts for other wargaming systems and a whole melange of oddities. Is there really any way out of this though? Games Workshop have noticed a huge gap in the market that they unwittingly created with the death of Warhammer and the birth of Age of Sigmar. Something they are now trying to rectify with the rebirth of the old world. A desperate attempt to recover the huge swaths of customers lost to age and skepticism. The old Hammer community, for instance, has grown fat and prosperous during the Age of Sigmar. In fact, it seems to have snowballed throughout the pandemic, with many old wargamers returning to the hobby in search of nostalgia. Not only that, but there is a growing gamut of websites dedicated to the old armies and their ways. Chaos Dwarfs Online, for example, is a thriving community that runs regular competitions, has its own podcast here on the channel, and is widely respected amongst the wargaming community. The problem with re-releases. There is one thing wargaming companies are past masters at, and that is the re-release. A rules update here, a new sculpt there, some new tiles with flashy digital graphics, and boom, you have a re-release. Games Workshop have done this 1,000 times over the years, new editions of games of course, but also renaming old games such as Gorka Morka, aka Speed Freaks, Warhammer Quest, aka Silver Tower, in brackets Warhammer Quest, and so on. But there is a lingering malaise that sits unsettlingly upon this phenomena. These new releases, whilst encouraging us to dream nostalgically about the past, do not fulfill those promises. The original Warhammer Quest, for instance, had a titanic tome of knowledge in its hallowed box, the roleplay book. Now, for those of you that don't remember the 90s, this book was legendary. It had all the rules for including every kind of monster in your games. Rules covering the goings-on outside of dungeons, the purchase of items from merchants, and entire adventures, completely outside the regular game's mechanics of dungeon crawling for treasure. This was a revelation. Not only did you have a full game's worth of content, but you had all the tools you needed to expand the world to your heart's content. Surely, this couldn't continue. Not in today's hump and dump world of pick up and play games, and it didn't. Whilst Silver Tower was surely beautiful, with its flashy dungeon tiles and marvellous miniatures, it had no role-play element. Further expansions I cannot account for, as I originally bought Silver Tower to expand original Warhammer Quest, something I highly recommend. So, for all intents and purposes, this newfangled game is just that. A game. Nothing more and nothing less. Well, that's just about all I have for you today. Be sure to tune in next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at my Bestigor. But before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss an update. The Bestigor are so called because they are naturally the best gore. Stronger and afforded better armour and weapons than their disorganised kin. When a group of beastmen carries out an ambush or other attack, the Bestigor are typically the frontline troops, closely supported by the Gore, with the Ungor harassing the enemy's flanks. The Bestigor are the elite of the Beastmen tribes, warriors that are blessed with the most spectacular horns and possess a mighty constitution and raw physical power that puts others of their kind to shame. They constantly enforce their superiority upon the Gore and Ungor, lest they become unruly. As well as being stronger, however, the Bestigor also tend to be more disciplined than their quarrelsome lesser brethren, forming more organised ranks in battle, while restraining themselves from their more disruptive excesses. Even so, brutality and violence simmer just below the surface of the Bestigor, ready to explode outwards in a savage display at any moment. Ordinarily, the ruinous powers pay little heed to the deeds of the Beastmen, knowing that the children of Chaos will enact their will regardless of any gifts or rewards offered. The Beastmen are utterly enthralled to the magnificence of Chaos, and are thus totally free of any constraints imposed by these malign gods upon their thoughts and actions. They do as they please, and, in doing so, serve Chaos with every shred of their being. So, let's take a look at my collection. As you can see, straight off the bat, I've included Skaven Storm Vermin, Classic, Citadel and Nightmare Miniatures models in this fab unit. They have a variety of weapons and armour, but for all intents and purposes are classed as Bestigor. A note on the Storm Vermin inclusion: I consider just about any crossbreed variants as Beastmen. So, Skaven, Lizardmen and others are all included in various ways throughout the army. These units actually contain the full release of Storm Vermin. See if you can spot them all. In my mind, they are a great stand-in model for the original Bestigor, as they come armed with great weapons just like their Beastmen counterparts, and fully donned out with heavy plate armour to boot. There are also classic Raupartha miniatures dotted throughout the collection too, which add even more variety to the units. This means there is a mix of pre-slaughter and slaughter-based models in each unit. Of course, you can't tell when they are ranked up, as I've used hollow-lipped 25mm square bases to ensure they rank up nicely alongside each other. You can get these from eBay in packs of 100 or more if you are interested in them. I think they are mandatory for including pre-slaughter models in your army, as you can mount the little blob of metal the miniature stands on down into the hollow and base over the top quite nicely. Ironically, I haven't included any original Bestigor in the army, simply because I don't have any of the models. The release was limited to 4 or 5 metal variants, which doesn't leave much in the way for modification or conversion. So, I figured I would simply use all the armoured beastmen I could find as my Bestigor. Because of their size and ferocity, the Bestigor carve out a privileged position within the warherd, forming the chieftain's inner circle of retainers and enforcers. Theirs is a high honour, and they pledge to fight to the death for their beast lord. However, their garrulous and aggressive nature compels them to strive for ever greater dominance amongst the tribe. The chieftain must be ever vigilant for signs of a likely challenge amongst the Bestigor. Sometimes such a sign is manifested physically, a Bestigor's horns growing larger or more impressive, for example. Sometimes the first sign of rebellion will be when the Bestigor bellows a challenge and swings his axe at the chieftain's head. Any chieftain worthy of the title will detect such signs early and deal with the potential rival before he comes fully into his strength. Though plenty miss this ominous portent and fall foul of their striving kin. One day, though, a challenger will come who is stronger, younger, and far more vigorous than the current incumbent, and then the chieftain's own hide will hang bleeding in the wind from the challenger's totem. From here, this vicious cycle is repeated again and again without end. Status within a beast tribe is typically regulated by the strongest individuals within the group. Those wishing to obtain a higher position simply have to challenge an opponent of higher status in a brutal and often fatal duel. Okay, on to the second unit. This regiment includes some fab grenadier bugbears, more Raupartha sculpts, Citadel and Nightmare Miniatures models too. In particular, there is a Beastmen war altar that is being carried by a couple burly fellows. This, I believe, was part of a Kickstarter campaign many years ago, although I'm afraid I can't remember who produced it, so please let me know in the comments below. Of course, no Beastmen Army is complete without some old classics. In my opinion, the older the better too. Hence the inclusion of some of these truly ancient models. Again, I'm a slut for nostalgia. If I can squeeze more classic miniatures into a regiment, I will do my utmost to do so. Some of the Nightmare Miniatures models are truly classy, based on the original artwork from the Realm of Chaos books. They evoke every bit as much class and character as the original Citadel sculpts. In some cases, more so, due to the use of modern modelling techniques, but a close adherence to the original design work. As you can see, I have used the Storm Vermin Drummer and Banner Bearer in this unit, and I'm using my favourite Gore champion model as the leader. The spider-headed guy is another Nightmare Miniatures gent and looks truly horrifying to behold. Typically, Bestigors carry massive double-handed axes, crude in construction but large and heavy enough to split a man in two from shoulder to waist with a single swing. They wear solid, heavy plate armour and chainmail, usually scavenged from the civilised races, and beaten with fist and hoof until they fit the Bestigor misshapen and stinking anatomies, and cover their faces with hoods, often made of chainmail. This they adorn with all manner of grisly trophies taken from those that have put up a fight before being cut into pieces. One expression of the Bestigor's constant desire to prove their innate superiority is shown in their acts of desecration and defilement. They seek out the elite troops of the enemy army, who inherently challenge their dominant status. Then they wield their huge axes, much as executioners' blades, hewing their foe limb from limb and trampling his body into the mud beneath their unshod hooves. Some powerful Gors have too much ambition to be willing to serve as a Bestigor and force their way up the hierarchy still further. At this point, these Gore leaders are known by many names, such as Beast Lords, Foe Renders, Gouge Horns, War Gors, Bane Beasts and Bane Gore. From here, the hierarchy becomes more complex. These different names are not merely local affectations, but precise statements of rank. These various Gore leaders will work together, each with their own smaller warband, banding together under one supreme leader of each horde. Fortunately, such cooperation is relatively rare, and the typical traveller will be most unlucky to be attacked by a beastman herd that is led not by one, but multiple leaders. The beastmen all worship the gods of chaos as the one true divine power of the old world. They are the product of their corruption and, as such, are wholly dedicated to the spreading of their will across all lands and beyond. As these beastmen pursue their endless hunt against all civilization, some beastmen commit such acts of savagery and bloodshed that the attentions of the dark gods themselves are turned their way. The third unit of Bestigor is made up from Citadel Pre-Slaughter, some more Nightmare miniature sculpts, Ralpatha metals, with once again integral bases, and a mixture of shields from my bits box. I try to use metal shields where possible, and like to stick to old school miniatures, chunky ones, if they are suitable and match the style of the model. I'm not sure where the mutated Chaos Dwarf comes from, but I like him, and he looks suitably bestial to be included in the unit. The Night Horrors demon I decide to jazz up a bit and paint red for his sins. One of my favourite classic Citadel models is the Unicorn Beastman, a really nice sculpt indeed, of which there are two variants. Bestigor with boar heads are always nice and give the unit a bit more variety. Funnily enough, I didn't intend for most of the boar heads to be in this third unit, but it turns out that's what happened. I really like the unit champion here. He looks like he has seen a lot of action, fully decked out in heavy armour and matching shield. Note the matching movement trays which I got from Products for Wargamers, a custom MDF company that can make movement trays to your specifications. I highly recommend them. Well, that's just about all I have for you today. Join me next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace! Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at my various gore that are aligned to the great powers of chaos, namely my Khorne gore, Plague Monks, Bestigor and Zangor. But before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss an update. The Beastmen are known as the Children of Chaos, and for good reason. They are the antithesis of everything good and wholesome in the world. Mutated and malformed beyond reason, and proudly displaying their corruption unashamedly for the world to see. They are a breed unlike any other. They are shackled to their basest instincts, violence being their most common outlet for their suffering. Whilst they boast a whole plethora of strengths, namely physical and in their very constitution, they are, for all intents and purposes, relatively simple creatures. Gorthor, the legendary Beast Lord, for instance, is famed for his tactical prowess and strategic acumen. He rose to such infamy due to being an outlier amongst his kin. Far smarter than any normal beastman, he rose to great prominence and was widely known as the Archaon of the Beastmen. Anyway, the Beastmen are an unwholesome bunch, matted fur stuck together with blood, dung and mud. Flies permanently pester them, whilst ticks grow fat on their bulky hides. Note, these are regular beastmen, to mention nothing of the Bestigor or other gore bound to their gods. As you can see, we are working our way through a mixed collection of Khorne gore, primarily Citadel 80s and more recent sculpts made from metal. However, there are also a couple kobolds or lizardmen from Relpatha too. As with my previous video on the Bestigor, you will notice I have mixed miniatures into my units from many backgrounds to add a touch of flavour to the overall look and feel of the army. No two miniatures are the same. As usual, there are the odd pre-slaughter models included too, which are mounted in hollow lit bases to rank up nicely with their brothers in arms. I haven't really gone for a specific armament amongst the Khorngor. They are a mixed bag of hand weapon and shield and great weapons. Note, I'm probably not going to be fielding them in conflict anytime soon, so the mismatched weapons don't really matter. I've gone for modest size units of 16 in 4x4 blocks to maximise on any rank bonus if the time ever does come to march to war. Whilst not as durable as a regiment of 20, there would be so many larger and more dangerous troops on the field that I suspect they would get off quite lightly when it comes to any kind of long-range weaponry. Naturally, I would presume the Minotaurs and monsters would be much more appropriate targets. Hell, Gorthor will be roaming about on his chariot. He would be a much tastier morsel for any cannons and volley guns amongst the enemy's ordnance. The Khorngor are beastmen who are sworn devotees of the Chaos God, Khorne. They bear the favoured colours of the Blood God, have skin and fur which is brazen in colour, in some cases almost metallic, and their eyes are milky white with red pupils. Many Khorngor are hound-headed with large jaws and fangs that drip with saliva. The most favoured bear horns which take the shape of Khorne's skull rune. The Khorngor are extremely tough and carry a substantial amount of armour for beastmen, as well as being more organised and disciplined. Other lesser beastmen among both Gore and Ungor rever and naturally fear the Bestigors blessed by chaos, respecting them greatly. Marvellous. The plague monks of Clan Pestilence are zealots utterly dedicated to the spread of corruption and decay in the name of the Great Horned One. These devout disciples of disease are unique amongst Skaven society in that they are fanatically committed to their clan and its purpose of creating the ultimate disease. Once this plague devastates all surface dwellers, the Skaven can rise up in the ruins and claim their proper inheritance, nothing short of the entire world. And the great horned rat will know who brought his children to their rightful and preordained ascendancy, and Clan Pestilence will sit over all and reign supreme. As the foul brethren march forward towards an enemy battle line, their chanting picks up its pace, and the plague monks seem to incite themselves into a terrible rage. In combat, plague monks hurl themselves into the fray with a fanatical ferocity, eager to bring death and destruction to their foes. They relentlessly attack with filth-encrusted blades, iron-tipped staves, or even their needle-sharp teeth. A plague monk's exposure to pestilence has rendered its toughened, boil-ridden skin immune to pain. The ability to shrug off crippling injury, combined with their near hysterical zealotry, means that the only reliable way of stopping a plague monk attack is to wholly dismember them. Okay, on to the plague monks. I'm not sure whether or not to simply class these lads as Bestigor for simplicity's sake, or if they suit the army as actual Skaven. Either way, I like the models and have painted them in a suitably grimy style, in keeping with the rest of the army. Again, they are a unit of 16 in 4 ranks of 4 and led by a fat rat on a bigger rat. No idea what his name is, but he is metal and quite heavy indeed. Nergal has a great hold of the Beastmen, and none are more dedicated to his worship than the Bestigor. Foul creatures of chaos, the Bestigor are decaying hulks of flesh, despised by even their own kin for their filth and the detritus they leave in their wake, yet admired in an odd kind of way, for they have reached a status amongst their brothers akin to that of greatness. They are tough and burly, often covering themselves in plate or chainmail armour, which make them all the harder to slay, whilst they wield rust-encrusted weapons as likely to split a man in two as to inflict horrific ailments to the few that survive. Bestigors are Nergalite gorekin that rampage through the wilds of the Jade Kingdoms. They fight beside Rotbringers, the Skaven plague monks of Clan Pestilens, and other allies and servants of Grandfather Nergal. Swollen and blistered with disease, Beastmen of Nergal swarm and breed in prodigious numbers. Their tribute to the Lord of Corruption takes many forms, although disgusting feasts of putrefied food and rather unwholesome refuse are frequent occurrences. No act of uncleanliness is too low for beastmen in Nergal's service. From the consumption of plague victims to wallowing and bathing in filth, nothing is beyond them. Nergal's beastmen are marked by the colours of disease and decay, often having sallow skin and jaundiced eyes. Their fur is usually brown, although its true colour is often hidden beneath layers of filth and dung. Beastmen of Nergal are bloated individuals, pockmarked by disease. They are often marked by carefully cultured abscesses in the shape of Nergal's runes. Their horns are twisted versions of Nergal's own wide horns, many with suckered ends. The most favoured are marked by tears of Nergal, oozing unhealthy secretions that drip from the eyes, nose, ears and mouth. The dedicated Bestigor are a mix of Citadel classics and more recent releases from the late 90s or early 2000s. They don't particularly match in sculpt style, so I've used a few of my collecting theory tenets to bring them together thematically, namely a strong colour scheme, matching bases and movement tray. They are led by a slug sorcerer made of resin. I believe he is some kind of Forge World model. I decided to give the bottom part of his tail a skirt to make him more slug-like. And the banner is a huge totem to Nergal, covered in skulls and glorious filth. There we go, some lovely oxide effects and rust and all kinds of filth. We follow up the marvellous Bestigor with their mighty army standard bearer. He is a heavily converted metal Bestigor, toting a custom banner made from 3 washers glued together and mutated faces sculpted over the top. The banner pole is brass wire. His hat is a resin offcut from a Max Mini Plague Head. He has a Reaper miniature skeleton holding a skull. The Royal Mail Postal Goblin from the Lord of the Rings Goblin Town set, who is sitting on a metal toadstool. And finally, there is an armoured skeleton holding the end of the banner pole. I actually aim to build 3 more similarly styled miniatures dedicated to each of the remaining Chaos Gods. However, haven't got around to doing it yet. We follow the army standard bearer with one of the Skaven special characters. He wields a huge plague censer flail and has a mighty paunch to boot. A very nice little model, who is a perfect addition to any Clan Pestilence force or Nergal themed army. Finally, we have Lord Skrulk, a powerful sorcerer with a plague censer staff and a Necronomicon, based on the Evil Dead version. Marvellous. Simply glorious. Simply glorious. Our last sojourn into Chaos for today is my Zangor from the Crocodile Games miniature company. They are mysterious Egyptian-styled Skeksis monsters wielding giant brass fell blades. And their standard bearer holds a totem entwined with an asp snake. Marvellous. Note the matching movement trays, which I got from Products for Wargamers, a custom MDF company that can make movement trays to your specifications. I highly recommend them. Marvellous. Well, that's just about all I have for you today. Join me next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at my men, monsters and mutants. But before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss an update. Here we go. We've finally got around to the most diverse and interesting collection of miniatures in the Beastmen Army, my mutants. They are a fine selection of classic Citadel, Eureka miniatures, Pendragon miniatures, Creative Sculpt, Satire Art Studios, Brugelberg, Raubparther Europe and Farmyard Animals. Amongst the Citadel miniatures there is an Old Hammer Troll, some Night Horrors, Mutant Beastmen, Gore, a scared Empire chap hiding, some Noblars and a Beastman Shaman. The Eureka Chaos Army is featured heavily in my own Chaos Army, the main belligerents hauling my giant Chaos battering ram, whilst the smaller chaps have been subsumed into my Children of Chaos unit. Meanwhile, Pendragon Miniatures has supplied a fantastic cross-section of freakish models to build up the second unit of 20. I had some spare Creative Sculpt familiars and smallish models to add to my large Children of Chaos unit. Satire Art Studios supplied the marvellous Blemmies, or gents with faces in their torsos. Of course, I couldn't forget the mad children from the Brugelberg release. They fit in perfectly with the rest of the oddities, so I based them up on the same 20mm squares and included them too. Raubparther Europe kindly provided a Beastman Shaman. At least I think it was Raubparther Europe. I guess it could have been Iron Winds in equal measure. Finally, I used some farmyard animals to bring out the chaotic nature of the army even more, namely in the use of Brian Ansell's head on the body of a swan, no less. As is my modus operandi throughout the rest of the army, I have concentrated on squeezing as many unique models into this collection as I can. There are lizardmen, beastmen, children, mutants, animals, and the like throughout each of the units. I've gone for units led by witches and sorcerers. The two main units of 20 each have a powerful Beastman shaman as their leader, whilst the Children of Chaos unit is led by an evil witch banished to the border regions by her hateful neighbours. Finally, the small skirmishing unit made up of some of the most mutated creatures in the army is led by a mutated matron-like Skeksis creature. In battle, I would imagine these strange bodies would be used in one key way: to slow down larger forces in order for the Bestigor, Korngor and Pestigor to assault their flanks. Being placed in locations to take the brunt of charges and probably being too stupid or cowardly to put up much of a fight, they would break and flee, whilst the elite units prepare ambushes to account for their inevitable cowardice. Chaos Mutant is the name given to a host of different beings found throughout the old world and beyond. They are beings who have been warped by the power of chaos into horrible monstrosities. During the War of the Wizards, vast magical energies were unleashed, and these energies altered the life forms living in the centre of the continent, creating Chaos Mutants. Other unscrupulous sorcerers and warlords have since experimented with creating their own mutants. Meanwhile, the corrupting influence of chaos itself has led to many mothers giving birth to strangely shaped babies along the northern borders. Mutants include those with chaos mutations, as well as those that develop them later in life, often known as turnskins. Mutants range from individuals desperate to belong to the rest of society, who conceal their deformity to the best of their ability, to those that embrace chaos completely, join a cult, and thus turn all their efforts to overthrowing the Empire. Regardless of their intentions, many mutants try to live as humans, if their mutations will permit, of course. If not, they are only alive because they either fled from the authorities or they were abandoned in the woods as children, and the life of an outcast is the only one they'll ever know. Some, particularly those with animalistic appearances, may be adopted by Beastmen warbands. Whilst the Empire is far from the Chaos Wastes, most of its citizens wouldn't dream of risking their souls through the worship of the Chaos Gods. However, mutant children are occasionally born, and some adults find themselves being altered in later life, even in centres of civilization such as Altdorf. Scholars provide a number of possible reasons for these occurrences. Morrslieb, the smaller of the world's two moons, is alleged to consist wholly of warpstone. The light of the moon is said to cause mutation in those who dally too long beneath it. Warpstone dust is sometimes blown in on strong northerly winds, and shards of it fall from the night as meteors. People say that wizards who cast spells too recklessly risk mutation, and that trafficking with demons or the undead is a surefire path to mutation. Many believe that mutation can result from sinful behaviour and imperious desires. Certainly, in the name of Slaanesh, this is known to be true. The authorities of the Empire take a hard line on mutants. Ancient edicts deem them tainted by chaos, and therefore enemies to be destroyed. No matter how rational or benign a particular mutant might appear. Imperially sanctioned witch hunters and members of the knightly orders track down and kill mutants with the same pitiless zeal they show sorcerers and demons. Nobles and town councils levy bounties on mutants as aggressively as they do on outlaws and marauding goblins. Folk in the Empire tend to regard mutants as physically disgusting and morally abhorrent. Whenever a mutant amongst them is exposed, many people gather in droves to witness its execution. The preferred way to put a mutant to death is to burn it at the stake, a spectacle sure to delight any crowd. Witch hunters who uncover a number of mutants in one area have been known to hold them prisoner for weeks before their execution. News of such a mass burning can draw crowds from miles around and works wonders for a witch hunter's reputation. Thus, to survive these most dangerous of times, a mutant must be especially resourceful or lucky. Those who find themselves altered by mutation do not immediately fall into the worship of chaos, despite the proclamations of nobles and priests. To develop a mutation is an incredibly distressing occurrence. Not only does the unfortunate mutant find his own flesh in revolt, but his neighbours will view him with horror and sell him out to the authorities, assuming they don't just kill him themselves. There are those who find it hard to turn over mutants. Some parents of mutant infants don't have the stomach to conspire in their offspring's execution. In rural areas, it is common for parents to leave such babes in the woods. The luckier mutant children abandoned in this way are discovered by roving herds of beastmen who raise them as their own. Whilst the unlucky, well, let's not dwell on such things. It is a widespread belief that as a mutant's body changes, his mind warps as well. Certainly, priests of Sigmar teach that mutation and wickedness go hand in hand, and that the deformities mutants bear are a mark of the malice in their souls. Most other religious authorities in the Empire agree. Even relatively broad-minded experts on the subject of mutation state that to become a mutant marks the beginning of an inescapable moral degradation that mirrors the corruption of the body wholesale. Some members of the Shalian and Varanen cults defy conventional views of mutation. Such radicals are careful in voicing their beliefs, for their superiors invariably support the authorities on the matter, but they privately assert that judging people based on appearance is wrong. Rumours persist of certain remote temple hospices that offer mutants sanctuary, even treatment. Senior members of the cult are quick to hush up such gossip. Some mutants seek the aid of medical professionals. This is a risky business, as many physicians would sooner alert the authorities than attempt to treat a mutant. That said, a minority of them are open-minded enough, or venal enough, to attempt surgical removals of mutated body parts. Even if a mutant is lucky enough to find a sympathetic physician, his problems are not over, however. Undergoing surgery is a dangerous business in the Empire at the best of times. Infection and inevitable death is the remit for most who go under the surgeon's knife. Indeed, most mutants are too poor to afford a competent surgeon, and don't have the connections to find sanctuary amongst radical cults. They try to remain inconspicuous amongst the ranks of paupers who inhabit urban rookeries. Some of them may be able to conceal their afflictions indefinitely, though most will either be exposed as mutants and executed, or inducted into the ranks of chaos cults where they make useful pawns. Many scholars in Altdorf are aware of the sad fate of the Bretonnian playwright Bruno Malvoisin, whose work, The Baneful Lusts of Diego Brasach, was rumoured to be so salacious that it delighted Slanesh himself. Bruno allegedly became a mutant shortly after the play was premiered, developing a rill of tentacles around his neck and other deformities. He vanished before the witch hunters found him, but his fate remains a warning to all those who mock the gods. Such a cautionary tale is typical of those that are told to young children who behave badly, or take the names of the gods in vain. Quite what it was that so pleased the Dark Prince of Chaos is unknown, as the play was subsequently banned and all known copies of the first folio were thrown onto a bonfire in Altdorf's Königplatz. It is common for mothers to warn their children off from certain antisocial habits on account of them making a mutant of you. Some naive folk believe such scolding even in adulthood. Common superstition in the old world holds that mutation can result from nose-picking, onanism, pulling faces, refusing to wash behind the ears, disrespecting your elders, and so on. Some optimists believe mutations can be cured. Legend speaks of a young nobleman from the south who was captured by a champion of the dark gods and taken to the Chaos Wastes. Gone but not forgotten, members of his family organised an expedition to rescue him. They did not realise what sort of beast he had become, a hulking creature with a wolf's head and claws. He discarded his bow and rapier, preferring to fight tooth and nail. Confronted with the mutant, a family retainer gave his life in order to save the man who was now a monster. The act of self-sacrifice redeemed the altered beast, who became the young aristocrat he had been before his ordeal. Few tales about mutation end so happily, and the moral guardians of the Empire deny that such a story is true. or even remotely possible for that matter. Interestingly, not all mutants are evil, nor does becoming one immediately render one subservient to the ruinous powers. This is shown in characters like Reekwald Marx, Karl Hock, and even the Forlorn Tower of Usin. Chaos mutants are beings who bear some resemblance to their original race, but now carry one or more gruesome deformities. For instance, a mutated human may have 2 heads, a beak for a mouth, or tentacles instead of arms. Some chaos mutants, such as the mutant lizard men, carry a disease that will infect any human that they bite. Rumour has it that it is possible for a victim of chaos mutation to be healed of the disorder and regain their normal physical form, although powerful magics will be required for such an endeavour, and even then there is no guarantee of success. Indeed, to invoke the very powers that cause such mutation in the healing of said affliction raises certain questions about what else you might be required to sacrifice in returning to your original wholesome self. Well, that's just about all I have for you today. Join me next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace. Welcome back, Nerglings. Today we are taking a look at my heavy-hitting units like centaurs, minotaurs and characters. But before we start, be sure to like, share and subscribe so you don't miss an update. So, on to the centaurs. We have a varied bunch of models from Citadel, Raupatha and Grenadier. All made from metal, save for my rather splendid conversion of the drummer that I made from half a metal pink horror and half a plastic farmyard animal. But what are the centaur? In Greek mythology, they were creatures with the upper body of a human and the lower body and legs of a horse, as wild as any untamed horse. They were said to have inhabited the region of Magnesia and Mount Pelion in Thessaly, the Pholoe oak forest in Elis, and the Malayan Peninsula in southern Laconia. Centaurs are subsequently featured in Roman mythology and were familiar figures in the medieval bestiary, and they remain a staple of modern fantastic literature today. The centaurs were usually said to have been born of Ixion and Nephili. As the story goes, Nephili was a cloud made into the likeness of Hera in a plot to trick Ixion into revealing his lust for Hera to Zeus. Ixion thus seduced Nephili, and from that relationship centaurs were created. Another version, however, makes them children of Centaurus, a man who mated with the Magnesian mares. Centaurus was either himself the son of Ixion and Nephili, inserting an additional generation, or of Apollo and the nymph Stilbe. In the latter version of the story, Centaurus's twin brother was Lapithes, ancestor of the Lapiths. Another tribe of centaurs was said to have lived on Cyprus. According to Nonnus, they were fathered by Zeus, who, in frustration after Aphrodite had eluded him, spilled his seed on the ground of that land. Unlike those of mainland Greece, the Cyprian centaurs were horned. There were also the Lamian Fears, 12 rustic demons of the Lamos River. They were sent by Zeus to guard the infant Dionysos, protecting him from the machinations of Hera. Next up, we have my pride and joy, a mighty bull-headed Minotaur standard bearer. He is obviously based on the superior original conversion by John Blanche, and is quite a character indeed. His standard is a photomanipulation of the Mona Lisa, because, let's face it, I couldn't replicate that for the life of me. With an evil sun looming behind her and the classic checkerboard effect surrounding it. His compatriots are an unwholesome mix of Midlam miniatures, my favourite Minotaur miniatures available anywhere today, and, of course, classic Citadel. To give them a slightly more chaotic feel, some of them have various mutations such as skull heads, griffin's claws, bestial visages, and the champion of the second unit even boasts his own snotling familiar. The Minotaurs are a vicious race of powerful doom breeds, half man and half bull. They stand many feet taller than a regular man and boast a constitution and size that simply dwarfs their distant cousins, the Beastmen. Revered as the mighty defenders of labyrinths and ancient citadels, the Minotaur stood out across ancient literature as a staple mythological beast. After ascending the throne of the island of Crete, Minos competed with his brothers as ruler. Minos prayed to the sea god Poseidon to send him a snow-white bull as a sign of the god's favour. He was to sacrifice the bull to honour Poseidon, but owing to the bull's beauty, he decided instead to keep him. Minos believed that the god would accept a substitute sacrifice. However, to punish Minos, Poseidon made his wife, Pasiphae, fall in love with the bull. Pasiphae had the craftsman Daedalus fashion a hollow wooden cow which he climbed into in order to mate with the bull. The monstrous Minotaur was the result. Pasiphae nursed the Minotaur, but he grew in size and became ferocious. As the unnatural offspring of a woman and a beast, the Minotaur had no natural source of nourishment, and thus devoured humans for sustenance. Minos, following advice from the oracle at Delphi, had Daedalus construct a gigantic labyrinth to hold the Minotaur in his palace at Knossos. The Minotaur is commonly represented in classical art with the body of a man and the head and tail of a bull. According to Sophocles' Tractii, when the river spirit Aeschylus seduced Daenerys, one of the guises he assumed was a man with the head of a bull. From classical antiquity through the Renaissance, the Minotaur appears at the centre of many depictions of the labyrinth. Ovid's Latin account of the Minotaur, which did not describe which half was bull and which half was man, was the most widely available during the Middle Ages, and several later versions show a man's head and torso on a bull's body, the reverse of the classical configuration, reminiscent of a centaur. The centaur's half-human, half-horse composition has led many writers to treat them as liminal beings, caught between the two natures they embody in contrasting myths. They are both the embodiment of untamed nature, as in their battle with the Lapiths, and conversely teachers like Chiron. The most common theory holds that the idea of centaurs came from the first reaction of a non-riding culture to nomads who were mounted on horses. The theory suggests that such riders would appear as half man, half animal. A note on centaurs. Here we have Carrick Clovenhoof, a legendary beast lord in his own right, a mythical centaur, half centaur and half beastman. He gallops into battle on flaming hooves, trampling his foes underneath his bulk. I decide to give him a bold red colour scheme to make him stand out from the rest of the troops in the army, in order to make him something of a centrepiece. Moving on, we have some fierce Chaos Hounds. Nothing particularly special here, just the standard set of metal hounds with a simple conversion for the Hellhound champion. I gave him an extra head. Wolves and hounds flock to the fields of battle, drawn by the scent of blood and the promise of flesh. They are the ultimate creatures of opportunity, attacking foes they can easily overwhelm whilst ignoring those that are clearly too tough or dangerous an opponent. After all, why attack heavily armoured knights when a flank attack on some lightly armoured bowmen will suffice? On to the Harpies. I have a group of 3 sculpts, 2 female and 1 male. I imagine Harpies, much like their Chaos Hound allies, would pester the weak and exposed flanks of their enemies. Archers, artillery crew and supply wagons would be perfect victims for their attentions, attacking their foes from up high with tooth and claw. Next up we have the Ungor, the smaller kin of the Gore. I have a skirmishing force of 10 individuals armed with spears and shields. I actually painted this lot about 10 years ago, however have only now got around to basing and varnishing them properly. Ungor, which means not quite right gore, other gore, not gore or no horns, are not as strong, tough, intelligent or robust of frame as the Gore, but they more than make up for it in sheer malevolence. For all intents and purposes, they are chaotic pan, goat-like creatures with evil spirits. Ungor are equal in size to men, and typically feature the hooves of a goat, yet possess a human-shaped face. They are physically smaller than other beastmen, and their horns are less impressive and less numerous. Within the violent hierarchy of the Beastmen tribes, the Ungor are a pathetic and lowly breed that stands among the lowest classes of Beastmen society, only surpassed by the unlucky Turnskins and Brays. They serve as workers, foot soldiers, and resentful victims to the brutish whims and bullying of their larger brethren, the Gore and Bestigor. Due to this, they can never truly occupy the higher echelons of their tribe, and are forever forced to live a life of poverty and suffering. A miserable state that is low for even the foulest of beastmen. This is what feeds their murderous intent. Onwards and upwards, Gorthor on his great chariot is next. I'm not a fan of the original chariot, nor its weird tusked boar, so I thought I would make a chariot that truly adds to Gorthor's old hammer credentials. Being a 90s sculpt, he is metal. However, plastic boars and a rather bland chariot and driver don't lend themselves well to a proper beast lord. So I swapped the chariot sides for the Goblin King's chariot sides and sourced 2 well-informed metal boars to pull the thing. To top the whole ensemble off, I added a brave goblin driver. The penultimate creature I would like to show you is my Jabberwocky. No, it's not a Jabberslice, because there's no such thing. This is a Jabberwocky, a creature of mysterious origins. Brutish and uncivilized to the extreme, the Jabberwocky is a monster of unmatched size and strength in my army. A veritable battering ram of muscle and stupid rage. Its knobbly, spined hide can turn away even the sharpest of blades, whilst its huge forearms drag its hefty frame forwards, spitting acid from its maw as it does so. Finally, but certainly not least, is my Vermin Lord. Although I wouldn't class it as a Vermin Lord as such, more like a greater demon of beasts, whatever that might be. I figured as I had a selection of Skaven in the army, and whilst all the other great powers have their own greater demons, that the Beastmen should be no different. In steps the Vermin Lord. A great old school model, he stands head and shoulders above his contemporaries, dwarfing even Gorthor himself in sheer size. Well, that's just about all I have for you today. Join me next time for some more wargaming content. Thanks very much for watching. Peace.